The first lie appeared in London 3 days after Aurelia Ashbourne's name became dangerous again. It arrived folded inside a society newspaper and spread across England before breakfast. By noon, noblewomen whispered it over tea. By evening, gentlemen repeated it beside club fireplaces. By midnight, half the country seemed convinced it was true. The missing Ashbourne heir was an impostor. Snow drifted across the city rooftops as carriage wheels rattled through the frozen streets below. Inside Blackmere Hall, Aurelia stood alone beside a tall window overlooking the cliffs and watched winter clouds swallow the horizon. The newspaper rested in her trembling hands. She had read the article 4 times already. Somehow it grew crueler each time. The headline occupied nearly half the page. Northern claimant challenges established inheritance. Questions surround alleged Ashbourne survivor. Her eyes moved lower. The words blurred briefly before sharpening again. Anonymous sources suggested the young woman currently residing at Blackmere Hall possessed no legitimate proof of noble birth and may have been coached to assume the identity of the deceased Ashbourne heiress. Aurelia folded the paper slowly. Anonymous sources. Everyone knew what that meant. House Vale had begun its attack. The room felt colder suddenly. She crossed toward the fireplace, but even the fire offered little comfort. 3 weeks earlier she believed she was a servant. A floor made from a fishing village. A woman so ordinary that guests rarely remembered her face after passing her in the corridor. Now England debated whether she existed at all. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Before she could answer, Mrs. Hollowmere entered carrying a silver tray. The older woman immediately noticed the newspaper. Her expression tightened. "You should not read those articles." Aurelia managed a faint smile. "That advice would have been useful before I finished the 4th reading." Mrs. Hollowmere set the tray near the fire. Fresh tea steamed gently into the room. People fear what threatens their comfort. Aurelia glanced toward the folded paper. "They fear me?" "No." Mrs. Hollowmere's voice remained calm. "They fear what your existence changes." Silence settled between them. Outside, wind brushed softly against the windows. Aurelia lowered herself into a chair near the fire. "I have not challenged anyone. Your existence does." Mrs. Hollowmere paused. "That is enough." The older woman excused herself soon afterward, leaving Aurelia alone again. The silence felt heavier now. Every answer she had uncovered inside Blackmere Hall seemed to create 2 new questions. She knew who she was, at least partially. She knew she had survived the Ashbourne fire. She knew someone had hidden her. She knew powerful families benefited from her disappearance. Yet knowing the truth had not restored her life. It had shattered the one she already possessed. A second knock sounded against the door. This time she recognized the visitor before he entered. Lucian Ravenshire rarely knocked twice. The Duke stepped inside carrying another newspaper beneath one arm. Snow dusted the shoulders of his dark wool coat. His expression revealed nothing. That usually meant trouble. Aurelia stood immediately. "Another article?" Lucian crossed toward the fireplace. "3 more." She stared at him. "3." He handed the newspapers over. Aurelia scanned the headlines. One questioned her identity. Another suggested Blackmere intended to seize Ashbourne property through fraud. The third implied Lucian himself orchestrated the entire affair. She looked up slowly. "They are attacking you now. They always intended to." His calm answer unsettled her more than anger would have. Aurelia lowered the papers. "Because of me. Because of what your existence represents." The distinction sounded small, felt enormous. Lucian removed his gloves and placed them on the mantel. Firelight moved softly across his face. For a moment neither spoke. Then Aurelia asked the question she had been avoiding all morning. "How bad is it?" Lucian met her gaze directly. He never lied to her when the truth mattered. "Worse than the newspapers suggest." Her stomach tightened. "What happened?" 3 northern families withdrew support from Blackmere this morning. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. "Because they believe I am a fraud? Because they are afraid you are not." The room became very quiet. Lucian crossed toward the window overlooking the cliffs. If Aurelia Ashbourne truly survived, decades of inheritance agreements become vulnerable. Aurelia stared at the fire. Meaning fortunes may change hands. Yes. Meaning people may lose everything. Yes. The simplicity of his answers frightened her. Not because he sounded uncertain, because he sounded certain. She rose slowly from her chair. Then perhaps I should leave Blackmere. Lucian turned immediately. The silence that followed lasted only seconds. Yet something inside it felt dangerous. No. Aurelia looked away first. You did not even consider it. No. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Lucian studied her carefully. Because running will not protect you. It might protect you. That is not your responsibility. Frustration slipped quietly into her voice. Everything seems to become my responsibility lately. His expression softened slightly. Only slightly. You did not start this war. Aurelia looked toward the newspapers scattered across the table. But I seem to be standing in the center of it. Lucian said nothing. That silence told her enough. Somewhere far below, one of Blackmere Hall's great clocks began striking the hour. The sound echoed faintly through the estate. Aurelia moved back toward the fire. What happens now? Lucian reached into his coat pocket and removed a sealed envelope. Black wax marked the fold. The seal had already been broken. This arrived from London an hour ago. Unease spread immediately through her chest. What is it? He handed her the letter. Aurelia unfolded the page carefully. The elegant handwriting belonged to a legal office she did not recognize. She read the first paragraph once. Then again. Her breath stopped. A petition? Lucian nodded. House Vale has formally challenged your identity. The room seemed smaller suddenly. Warmer. Harder to breathe inside. Aurelia continued reading. The petition requested an official inquiry into her claim as Aurelia Ashbourne. Witness testimony. Estate records. Family evidence. Everything would be examined publicly. She lowered the page slowly. They want a trial. Yes. In London. Yes. The word echoed inside her mind. London. Not hidden corridors. Not private conversations. Not forgotten archives. Public scrutiny. Public judgment. Public humiliation if she failed. Aurelia crossed toward the window again. Snow swirled beyond the glass. What if they are right? Lucian's answer came instantly. They are not. She almost laughed. You sound very certain. I am. Because of birth records? Because of you. The statement settled heavily between them. Aurelia turned toward him. Firelight flickered softly across the room. For one brief moment, neither looked away. Then a servant appeared at the doorway. Your Grace. Lucian shifted his attention immediately. What is it? A messenger has arrived from London. The footman hesitated. He says the matter cannot wait. Lucian exchanged a glance with Aurelia before following the servant downstairs. 20 minutes later, she found him in the entrance hall reading another letter. Several members of the household stood nearby. Mrs. Hollowmere, 2 senior stewards. Even the estate solicitor had arrived. Nobody looked pleased. Aurelia approached carefully. What happened? Lucian folded the document. His expression remained unreadable. That frightened her more than bad news. The inquiry has been accelerated. Accelerated. The hearing begins in 10 days. Silence followed. 10 days. Aurelia felt as though the floor shifted beneath her feet. 10 days to prove she existed. 10 days to defend a life she only recently discovered belonged to her. 10 days before England decided whether Aurelia Ashbourne was real. The solicitor cleared his throat. There is another complication. Lucian looked toward him. Explain. The older man hesitated. Several inheritance records remain missing. Aurelia felt cold spread through her chest. The stolen documents. The ones taken from Blackmere's archives. The evidence that could have protected her. Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. How many? Enough to create difficulties. Difficulties. Aurelia had learned that lawyers use gentle words for dangerous problems. The entrance hall fell silent again. Wind rattled softly against the glass doors. Somewhere beyond the estate, snow continued falling across the northern coast. Lucien dismissed the household staff moments later. Soon only he and Aurelia remained beside the staircase. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Aurelia broke the silence. "You knew this would happen." Lucien looked toward the storm outside. "Yes." "Then why did you tell me the truth?" The question escaped more quietly than she intended. Lucien remained still several seconds before answering. "Because you deserved it." Aurelia lowered her gaze. "Even if it destroyed everything?" His answer came without hesitation. "A lie already destroyed enough." The words lingered between them, heavy, unavoidable. For the first time that day, she felt something stronger than fear. Determination. Small, fragile, but real. She had spent 18 years living beneath another name, hiding inside a life built on secrets. If House Vale wanted war, they would have to drag her into the light first. A sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. Hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. Both of them turned toward the entrance doors. Moments later, a footman hurried inside carrying a leather satchel. His face looked unusually pale. "Your Grace." Lucien stepped forward. "What happened?" The man swallowed carefully. "A rider arrived from London." He handed over a sealed document. "The Crown has requested your presence at Westminster." Silence crashed through the hall. Even Aurelia understood what that meant. This was no longer merely a dispute between families. The entire country had begun paying attention. Lucien broke the seal and read the contents in silence. His expression hardened with every line. Aurelia felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. "What does it say?" Lucien lowered the page slowly. Firelight reflected across the black wax seal. When he finally looked at her, something cold had settled behind his gray eyes. "House Vale is not asking whether you are Aurelia Ashbourne anymore." The silence stretched painfully. "Then what are they asking?" Lucien's voice remained calm. Too calm. "They are asking whether you should be allowed to keep the name at all." The snowstorm reached Blackmere Hall before dawn and remained there as though winter itself had decided to watch the coming war. By morning, the cliffs had vanished completely beneath white fog. The sea could no longer be seen from the eastern windows. Even the horizon had disappeared. Aurelia stood alone inside the observatory tower, staring into a world reduced to shades of gray. The old journals remained spread across the desk where she and Lucien had left them days earlier. Ashbourne records, Ravenshire letters, fragments of a stolen life. None of them mattered as much as the letter now resting in her hands. "House Vale is not asking whether you are Aurelia Ashbourne anymore. They are asking whether you should be allowed to keep the name at all." The words had followed her throughout the night. She had slept little. Every time exhaustion finally pulled her toward rest, another question surfaced. What if London believed the lies? What if the missing records could not be recovered? What if she lost the only truth she had ever found? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She did not turn immediately. Only one person climbed the tower stairs before breakfast. Lucien entered moments later carrying a leather folder beneath one arm. He crossed toward the desk without speaking. Aurelia noticed the shadows beneath his eyes. He had not slept much either. "You have been awake since sunrise," she said quietly. "Earlier." His answer did not surprise her. Lucien opened the folder and spread several documents across the desk. Legal notices, correspondence, estate reports, the machinery of aristocratic warfare. Aurelia moved closer. More bad news. More expected news. She almost smiled at that. Almost. That does not sound encouraging. It is not meant to. His gaze remained on the papers. House Whitmore has withdrawn support. Aurelia frowned. The family from York? Yes. Why? Lucien looked up. Because they benefited from Ashbourne lands after the fire. Silence settled between them. Another piece of the puzzle slid quietly into place. House Vale was not standing alone. The deeper she looked, the larger the network became. Families, alliances, agreements signed years ago, Wealth built upon her disappearance. Lucian turned another page. House Fenwick withdrew this morning. Also connected? Yes. Aurelia stared at the documents. How many families gained from what happened to Ashbourne? Lucian remained silent long enough to answer without words. Too many. Cold moved through her chest. For 18 years she had imagined herself forgotten. The truth felt worse. She had never been forgotten. She had been profitable. A sharp gust rattled the observatory windows. Snow swirled against the glass. Lucian closed one folder and opened another. There is something else. Aurelia immediately recognized the tone. The dangerous one. What happened? 2 members of Parliament have publicly supported the inquiry. Against me? Officially, they support transparency. Aurelia laughed softly. There was little humor in it. And unofficially? They support House Vale. She moved toward the window again. London felt very far away from Blackmere Hall. Yet somehow the battle had already arrived. How much of England believes them? She asked. Lucian considered the question carefully. Enough. Aurelia closed her eyes briefly. That single word carried more weight than any number. Enough. Enough people to create doubt. Enough people to influence judges. Enough people to destroy a reputation before it fully existed. She opened her eyes again. Then perhaps we should stop defending me. Lucian looked up sharply. No. Listen to me. She turned toward him. You said families are abandoning Blackmere. Political allies are leaving. Parliament is becoming involved. Her voice remained calm despite the fear beneath it. How much damage must one woman cause before she becomes too expensive to protect? Silence followed. The observatory seemed smaller suddenly. The old tower held its breath around them. Lucian rose slowly from his chair. Do you know what House Vale expects? Aurelia frowned slightly. What? They expect you to say exactly that. His voice remained controlled. They expect pressure to make you retreat. He stepped closer. They expect shame to make you disappear. Aurelia looked away first, because part of her had considered it. Part of her still did. Lucian stopped a few feet away. You survived 18 years of lies. His voice lowered slightly. Do not surrender now that the truth exists. The words settled quietly between them. Aurelia stared at the floorboards. Somewhere beneath the fear, another emotion stirred. Anger. Not loud. Not reckless. Steady. Cold. The kind that remained after grief exhausted itself. I am tired of being afraid, she whispered. Lucian answered immediately. Good. She looked up. Good. A faint shadow of a smile appeared. Briefly. Fear is useful. Surrender is not. Before she could answer, rapid footsteps echoed from the stairwell below. Both turned toward the door. Moments later, Mrs. Hollowmere appeared. Her composure remained intact. Her eyes did not. Aurelia recognized concern immediately. What happened? Mrs. Hollowmere crossed the room carrying a sealed letter. A messenger arrived from Edinburgh. Lucian accepted the correspondence. The housekeeper continued. The writer traveled through the night. Lucian broke the seal. His expression changed after the first paragraph. Not dramatically, just enough. Aurelia had learned to notice small changes. Those mattered most. What is it? She asked. Lucian finished reading before answering. A witness. Silence filled the observatory. Aurelia stared at him. A witness. Someone connected to Ashbourne. Her pulse quickened immediately. Who? Lucian handed her the letter. The handwriting belonged to an estate solicitor in Scotland. Aurelia read carefully. A former nursery maid from Ashbourne Manor had reportedly been located living near the coast. She was elderly now, nearly forgotten. Yet, according to the report, she remembered the fire. More importantly, she remembered the child. Aurelia lowered the page slowly. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew me? Possibly. After 18 years? Possibly. The uncertainty barely mattered. Hope had already entered the room. Fragile but powerful. Mrs. Hollowmere folded her hands carefully. The woman claims she can identify the Ashbourne heir. Aurelia looked toward Lucian. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then the obvious question arrived. Will she testify? Lucian's expression darkened again. Hope never traveled alone. Trouble always followed. House Vale learned about her yesterday. The room became very still. Aurelia understood immediately. They will try to reach her first. Yes, Mrs. Hollowmere looked toward the snow-covered windows. If they have not already. The possibility settled heavily over the room. Another race had begun. Another piece of evidence hanging between truth and disappearance. Aurelia moved back toward the desk. How far away is she? Nearly 200 miles. Lucian closed the letter. A difficult journey in this weather. Then we leave immediately. Both Lucian and Mrs. Hollowmere looked at her. Aurelia met their surprise steadily. What? Lucian studied her for a moment. You wish to travel? This woman may be the only living witness left. Aurelia's voice strengthened with every word. If she remembers me, then I want to hear it myself. Silence followed. Then something shifted behind Lucian's eyes. Respect, perhaps. Approval. He nodded once. Very well. Aurelia blinked. That was easier than expected. You are beginning to sound like an Ashbourne. The observation caught her off guard. For the first time in days, a genuine smile threatened. It vanished quickly, but not before Lucian noticed. The moment lingered longer than either intended. Then another knock interrupted the room. A younger footman entered carrying a second bundle of correspondence. Your Grace. Lucian accepted the letters. The servant hesitated. There is one more matter. Yes. A visitor has arrived. Mrs. Hollowmere frowned. In this weather? Yes, ma'am. The footman swallowed carefully. He claims the matter concerns House Ashbourne. Every trace of warmth vanished from the room. Lucian set the letters aside. Who is he? The servant looked uncertain. He refused to give a family title. Silence followed. Then he added quietly, but he says he remembers the night of the fire. No one spoke. Aurelia felt her heartbeat quicken once more. Another witness. Another stranger carrying pieces of a night that had stolen 18 years from her life. Lucian's expression hardened immediately. Where is he now? The west drawing room. The Duke moved toward the door at once. Aurelia followed instinctively. Mrs. Hollowmere joined them seconds later. Together they descended the tower staircase and crossed the silent corridors of Blackmere Hall. Snow rattled against the windows as they walked. Servants stepped aside quickly. The atmosphere inside the manor had changed. Everyone could feel it. The war was growing larger. By the time they reached the west drawing room, tension stretched through the corridor like a wire pulled too tight. Lucian opened the door without hesitation. Aurelia entered beside him. A lone gentleman stood near the fireplace. He appeared to be in his late 60s. His traveling coat looked worn from weather and distance. Gray hair framed a deeply lined face. Yet his posture remained surprisingly straight. The stranger turned as they entered. His eyes moved immediately toward Aurelia. For a moment he simply stared. Not with curiosity. Recognition. The room fell silent. Aurelia felt her pulse hammering. The man took one slow step forward. Emotion flickered across his face before he managed to hide it. Good Lord, he whispered. No one moved. The fire crackled softly behind him. Finally Lucian spoke. You requested an audience concerning House Ashbourne. The stranger never looked away from Aurelia. Yes. His voice sounded rough with age and travel. Because I have spent 18 years wondering whether that child survived. Aurelia could barely breathe. The man swallowed once before continuing. And now I believe I am looking at her. Silence crashed through the room. Lucian's gaze sharpened instantly. Mrs. Hollowmere looked stunned. Aurelia stood frozen beside the door. Then the stranger reached slowly inside his coat and removed a folded document. The paper looked old. Very old. He held it carefully between weathered fingers. Before anyone asks, he said quietly, I did not come empty-handed. Lucian stepped forward. "What is that?" The man's eyes remained fixed on Aurelia. "Proof." And for the first time since the war for House Ashbourne began, hope felt stronger than fear. The old document had been folded so many times that the edges looked ready to crumble. For several seconds, no one moved. Snow rattled softly against the drawing-room windows while the fire cast shifting light across the stranger's weathered face. Aurelia stared at the paper in his hand and felt her heartbeat quicken. Proof. The word sounded almost unreal now. Too many records had vanished. Too many answers had disappeared into silence. Lucian stepped forward first. "May I see it?" The gentleman nodded and carefully extended the document. Lucian accepted it with the caution usually reserved for something fragile and irreplaceable. Aurelia crossed the room slowly. Mrs. Hollowmere remained near the doorway, watching with unusual tension. Lucian unfolded the page beneath the firelight. Silence filled the room. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Aurelia recognized it immediately. Surprise. Genuine surprise. "What is it?" she asked. Lucian handed the document toward her. "Read it." Aurelia accepted the paper carefully. The handwriting appeared faded with age. Several lines had become difficult to decipher. Yet one section remained painfully clear. December 22, 1809. Temporary transfer of custody authorized under emergency protection order. Child identified as Aurelia Ashbourne. Crescent family mark confirmed. Aurelia felt the room tilt slightly around her. Her eyes moved lower. Witnessed and recorded by estate steward Henry Whitlock. She looked up sharply. The gentleman standing beside the fireplace gave a small nod. "That was my name." Silence followed. Aurelia stared at him. "You were the steward?" "For nearly 20 years." His voice carried the weight of old memories. "I served House Ashbourne before the fire." Lucian took the document again and examined the signatures near the bottom. "These seals appear authentic." "Because they are." Henry Whitlock crossed slowly toward the fire. "I kept that paper hidden longer than I care to admit." Aurelia struggled to process everything at once. The document named her directly. It recognized her existence. It confirmed the emergency transfer after the fire. More importantly, it connected her to Ashbourne through official records created before she vanished. Hope surged through her chest. Then caution followed immediately afterward. Nothing had been simple so far. "Why come forward now?" she asked quietly. Henry looked toward her. Something sad flickered briefly across his face. "Because I recently learned people are trying to erase you again." The room became still. Henry lowered himself into a chair near the fireplace. Exhaustion seemed to settle over him all at once. "When I heard rumors from London, I realized the truth had finally resurfaced." Lucian remained standing beside the mantel. "How did you learn about the inquiry?" "A solicitor." Henry removed his gloves slowly. "An old acquaintance sent word north." Aurelia studied him carefully. She wanted to trust him. Yet trust had become difficult. Too many secrets surrounded her life. Too many people claimed to know pieces of her past. Henry seemed to understand her hesitation. "You have questions." "Many." A faint smile appeared. "Good. You should." He leaned back slightly. "Ask them." Aurelia glanced toward Lucian before returning her attention to the former steward. "Do you remember my parents?" Henry's expression softened immediately. "Very clearly." The answer struck harder than expected. For 18 years her parents had existed only as shadows. Names. Fragments. Ghosts hidden inside stories. Now someone sat before her who had known them. "What were they like?" she asked quietly. Henry looked toward the fire. For several seconds he seemed to travel backward through time. "Your mother was kind." His voice lowered slightly. "Far kinder than most people in her position." Aurelia listened without moving. She knew the names of every servant child on the estate. A faint smile touched his face. "That may sound small to some people." It was not. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Aurelia's chest. Henry continued. "Your father possessed a strong sense of duty, sometimes too strong. He worried constantly. About what? Everything. The old steward laughed softly. Harvests, trade routes, weather, politics. His expression darkened slightly, especially politics during the final years. Lucien exchanged a brief glance with Mrs. Hollowmere. Everyone understood why. Aurelia folded her hands together. Did they know they were in danger? Henry's smile disappeared completely. Silence settled over the room. Finally he nodded once. Yes. The answer felt heavier than all the others. How long? Months. Aurelia stared at him. Months. Henry nodded again. Perhaps longer. Lucien stepped closer. Danger from whom? Henry looked directly at the Duke. That question became very expensive 18 years ago. No one spoke. The fire crackled softly between them. Henry exhaled slowly. Your father believed someone wanted control of northern inheritance agreements. Aurelia felt cold spread through her chest. The same story, the same warning, the same fear repeated by every surviving piece of evidence. Yet hearing it from someone who lived through those days made it feel more real, more immediate. Henry looked toward her again. Your mother feared something else. What? He hesitated. Betrayal. Silence followed. Aurelia lowered her gaze briefly. The word echoed through her thoughts. Betrayal. Not rivalry. Not greed. Betrayal. Someone trusted. Someone welcomed. Someone close enough to enter Ashbourne Manor without raising alarm. Lucien's expression hardened slightly. Did she ever name anyone? Henry remained silent several seconds before answering. No. Yet something in his face suggested the truth was more complicated. Aurelia noticed it immediately. So did Lucien. You know more than that, the Duke said quietly. Henry looked toward the fire. Perhaps. Then tell us. The old steward's eyes closed briefly. When he opened them again, years of caution seemed to return. Not yet. Frustration flashed across Aurelia's face before she could hide it. Henry noticed. I understand your impatience. Do you? The question escaped more sharply than intended. Silence followed. Then Henry nodded. You lost 18 years. His voice remained gentle. I lost 18 years of certainty. The room softened slightly. Aurelia looked away. Part of her regretted the outburst immediately. Henry continued. I came because the document belongs to you. He gestured toward the paper resting on the table. And because there is something else you should know. Every eye in the room turned toward him. The old steward reached into his coat once more. This time he removed a small object wrapped in cloth. Aurelia's pulse quickened again. Henry carefully unfolded the fabric. A silver locket rested inside. The room fell silent. Aurelia stared at it. Something deep inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. Not memory exactly. Recognition. The sensation unsettled her. Henry held the locket toward her. This belonged to your mother. Her breath caught. Slowly she accepted the piece. The silver felt cold against her fingertips. Time had dulled its surface, yet traces of delicate engraving remained visible around the edges. Winter roses, crescent moons, Ashbourne symbols. Aurelia swallowed carefully. How did you keep this? Henry's expression darkened. Because I promised I would. Tears threatened unexpectedly behind her eyes. She looked down at the locket. A small clasp rested near the side. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside sat 2 miniature portraits. One depicted a woman with gentle eyes and dark hair. The other showed a smiling man standing beside her. Aurelia could not look away. For the first time in her life, she was seeing her parents. Not paintings in a hallway. Not descriptions in a journal. Their faces. Real. Human. Beloved. The room disappeared around her. Only the locket remained. Only the people who should have been part of her life. A tear slipped free before she could stop it. She quickly lowered her head. Henry pretended not to notice. Lucien did the same. The kindness of that silence nearly broke her completely. Several moments passed before she found her voice again. Thank you. Henry nodded once. It always belonged to you. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm continued across the cliffs. Then Lucian spoke. There is still one problem. Reality returned immediately. Aurelia closed the locket and looked up. The hearing. Lucian nodded. This document helps. The locket helps. His expression remained serious. But neither guarantees victory. Henry's face hardened slightly. I know. Aurelia felt hope retreat just enough for fear to return. Then what does House Vale still have? Lucian answered before anyone else could. Influence. The word lingered heavily. Henry slowly rose from his chair. Influence can shape public opinion. He glanced toward the snow-covered windows. Especially in London. Aurelia already knew where this conversation was heading. Public scrutiny. Public humiliation. Public judgment. The battlefield had shifted. It would no longer be hidden inside archives and private corridors. England itself would become the audience. Henry turned toward her. Have you ever attended a London season? Aurelia almost laughed. I was a floor made 3 weeks ago. Even Henry smiled faintly at that. Then the smile faded. Then you should prepare yourself. Unease returned immediately. For what? The old steward looked directly into her eyes. Because House Vale will not try to defeat you in court first. Silence settled over the room. Lucian's expression sharpened. He already understood. Henry continued quietly. They will try to destroy you in society. The words landed with terrifying clarity. Not legal arguments. Not evidence. Reputation. Rumors. Isolation. The oldest weapons of aristocratic power. Aurelia felt cold spread through her chest. Henry stepped toward the door. And once London decides who you are, proving the truth becomes much harder. The room remained silent after he spoke. No one disagreed. No one could. Because somewhere beyond Blackmere Hall, invitations were already being written. Ballrooms were already filling. Noble families were already choosing sides. And for the first time since discovering her identity, Aurelia realized a frightening truth. The coming battle would not begin inside a courtroom. It would begin the moment she stepped into London, and every eye in England turned toward the woman they claimed should never have returned. For the first time in her life, Aurelia Ashbourne dreaded being seen. The realization arrived 3 mornings later as Blackmere's carriage rolled through the outskirts of London beneath a sky the color of silver smoke. Hundreds of people moved through the streets around them. Merchants, servants, gentlemen, ladies. None of them knew who sat behind the carriage curtains. Yet somewhere ahead, an entire city had already formed opinions about her. The thought settled heavily in her chest. Aurelia lowered her gaze toward the silver locket resting in her lap. Since Henry Whitlock's arrival, she carried it almost constantly. Not because it proved anything, because it reminded her that she belonged to someone before the world decided whether she deserved a name. Across from her, Lucian sat quietly reviewing correspondence. He had spent most of the journey reading letters and drafting replies. The closer they came to London, the more messages seemed to arrive. Invitations, challenges, warnings, rumors disguised as concern. Aurelia had stopped asking about most of them. She already knew the answer. The war was spreading. The carriage slowed slightly as it entered a crowded avenue lined with elegant townhouses. Snow from the northern storm had disappeared days earlier, replaced by damp winter fog drifting between the buildings. Aurelia glanced through the window. London felt different from every place she had ever known. Larger, faster, less forgiving. Lucian folded another letter and slipped it into his coat. We will arrive shortly. Aurelia nodded. Neither spoke for several moments. Then she asked the question that had followed her throughout the journey south. Do you regret bringing me here? Lucian looked up immediately. No. The answer came so quickly that she almost smiled. Almost. You did not even think about it. No. A faint shadow of amusement appeared in his eyes. You have noticed that habit. It is difficult not to. Silence settled briefly. Then Lucian's expression grew serious again. Do you regret coming? Aurelia considered the question honestly. She looked toward the passing city outside. Hundreds of strangers. Thousands of opinions. A future balanced on evidence she had only recently discovered existed. "I am afraid," she admitted. Lucian nodded once. "Reasonable. That was not my question." "I know." His voice softened slightly. "Fear and regret are not the same thing." Aurelia lowered her gaze toward the locket again. No, they were not. The carriage finally turned through ornate iron gates and entered a private courtyard surrounded by stone buildings. Servants hurried forward immediately. Footmen opened carriage doors. Stable hands moved toward the horses. Everything happened with practiced efficiency. Lucian stepped down first before turning toward her. Aurelia accepted his hand. The simple gesture lasted only seconds. Yet for reasons she could not fully explain, it steadied her. She emerged into cold winter air and looked up. The London residence of House Ravenshire stood 4 stories tall, elegant without appearing excessive. Tall windows overlooked the square beyond. Black iron balconies framed the upper floors. It looked powerful, controlled, much like the man standing beside her. "Welcome to London," Lucian said quietly. Aurelia wished the city felt welcoming. By evening, she understood exactly how right Henry Whitlock had been. The attack began before sunset. Mrs. Hollowmere entered the drawing room carrying a stack of invitations shortly after 6 o'clock. Aurelia sat near the fireplace attempting to read. Lucian occupied a nearby desk reviewing legal correspondence. The housekeeper placed the invitations carefully on the table. Her expression revealed enough before she even spoke. "There appears to be a pattern." Lucian looked up. "Explain." Mrs. Hollowmere handed over the stack. Aurelia watched as he examined the cards. One after another. Ball invitations. Winter receptions. Charity galas. Private dinners. Every important social gathering scheduled over the next 2 weeks. Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. "Interesting." Aurelia set her book aside. "What happened?" Mrs. Hollowmere answered first. "You have not been invited." Silence followed. Aurelia blinked once, then twice. "To any of them?" "No." Lucian placed the invitations back onto the table. "Not one." The realization settled slowly, deliberately. London society had already chosen its strategy. They would not attack her directly. They would pretend she did not exist. Aurelia leaned back against her chair. Strange. The rejection hurt less than expected. Perhaps because it felt familiar. Invisible women rarely received invitations. She had spent years walking through crowded rooms unnoticed. The difference now was that everyone noticed her absence intentionally. Mrs. Hollowmere folded her hands. Several hostesses specifically requested confirmation that Miss Ashbourne would not attend. Aurelia laughed softly beneath her breath. There was little humor in the sound. "How thoughtful." Lucian's expression darkened immediately. The room fell quiet. Firelight flickered against the walls. Outside, carriage wheels rolled through distant streets. Aurelia reached for her teacup. Her hands remained steady. She felt oddly detached from the conversation, as though discussing someone else. Then the matter seemed simple. Lucian looked toward her. "Simple? London does not want me." She lifted the cup calmly. Problem solved. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Aurelia noticed it immediately. So did Mrs. Hollowmere. Lucian rose slowly from behind the desk. "No." She lowered the teacup. "No. No." His voice remained controlled. That somehow made it stronger. "The problem is not solved." Aurelia met his gaze. "What would you prefer?" "The truth." The answer arrived instantly. "You are not unwanted." "That appears debatable." "No." He crossed toward the fireplace. "You are inconvenient." The distinction surprised her enough to quiet any response. Lucian stopped beside the mantel. "There is a difference." Aurelia looked away first, because she understood exactly what he meant. House Vale wanted isolation. If society rejected her before the inquiry began, the outcome would become easier to influence. Reputation often reached the courtroom before evidence did. A knock interrupted the room. One of the footmen entered carrying another sealed envelope. Your Grace. Lucian accepted the correspondence. The servant hesitated before adding, the messenger requested an immediate reply. The footman withdrew moments later. Lucian broke the seal. Aurelia watched his expression carefully. Whatever he read did not improve his mood. More bad news? She asked. He handed her the letter. Aurelia scanned the contents. Her pulse quickened immediately. The invitation came from Lady Winthrop, one of London's most influential hostesses. A grand winter ball scheduled 3 nights from now. The entire aristocracy would attend. Ministers, noble families, political allies, everyone. Aurelia looked up. I thought I was not invited. You were not. Confusion flickered through her thoughts. Then she read the final paragraph. Her stomach tightened. The invitation had been addressed exclusively to Lucian Ravenshire. One guest only. No exceptions. No companions. No claimants. No controversies. No Aurelia. The insult could not have been more obvious if written directly across the page. Mrs. Hollowmere looked genuinely offended. How remarkably transparent. Lucian folded the letter once. Deliberately. Yes. Aurelia set it down carefully. Will you attend? The room became very still. Mrs. Hollowmere looked toward the Duke. Aurelia immediately regretted asking. Of course he would attend. Political alliances mattered. The inquiry approached. Relationships required maintenance. Rationally, she understood all of it. Yet the answer still mattered more than it should. Lucian picked up the invitation. For a brief moment he studied the elegant handwriting. Then he crossed toward the fire. Aurelia watched in silence. So did Mrs. Hollowmere. Without hesitation, Lucian dropped the invitation directly into the flames. The paper curled almost instantly. Gold ink blackened. Wax seals melted. Within seconds, nothing remained but ash. No one spoke. Aurelia stared at the fireplace, certain she had misunderstood what she just witnessed. Finally, Mrs. Hollowmere found her voice. Your Grace. Lucian never looked away from the fire. I am aware. The housekeeper wisely chose not to continue. Aurelia remained frozen beside her chair. You declined. Yes. Lady Winthrop hosts half the government. Yes. And several judges. Also yes. She stared at him. Why? Only then did Lucian turn toward her. Firelight moved across his expression. Calm. Steady. Certain. Because anyone who invites me while excluding you has misunderstood the situation. Silence filled the room. The words landed harder than any grand declaration could have. Aurelia looked away immediately, not because she disagreed, because something inside her chest had become dangerously unsteady. Mrs. Hollowmere suddenly appeared, fascinated by the teapot. Lucian returned to the desk as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet everything felt different now. The fire crackled softly. The city continued beyond the windows. Somewhere in London, Lady Winthrop still expected an answer. She had already received one. 2 hours later, another arrived. This time it came from Parliament itself. Lucian read the document in silence. Then his expression hardened. Aurelia immediately recognized trouble. What happened? Lucian lowered the page slowly. The inquiry date has changed. The room fell silent again. When? She asked. Sooner. A cold sensation spread through her chest. How much sooner? Lucian met her gaze directly. 5 days. Mrs. Hollowmere inhaled sharply. Aurelia felt her heartbeat quicken. 5 days. 5 days to prepare. 5 days to survive London society. 5 days to defend 18 stolen years. Lucian folded the document carefully. Then another detail caught his attention. His eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Aurelia frowned. What? He reread the final paragraph. Once, then again. When he finally looked up, something colder had entered his expression. The inquiry panel has added a new advisor. The room became very still. Aurelia already knew she would not like the answer. Who? Lucian's voice remained calm. Too calm. Lord Cedric Vale. Silence crashed through the room. And for the first time since arriving in London, Aurelia realized House Vale was no longer preparing for battle. The battle had already begun. Some witnesses arrive carrying answers. Others arrive carrying questions no one expected to ask. Aurelia discovered the difference the following morning. London woke beneath a blanket of cold rain. Water streaked down the tall windows of Ravensshire House while grey clouds pressed low above the city. The weather seemed determined to drain every trace of color from the world. Aurelia stood in the library shortly after breakfast, staring at a map spread across a long mahogany table. Blackmere records, Ashbourne estates, trade routes, locations connected to the fire. The investigation had expanded beyond inheritance claims now. Every answer uncovered another hidden path. Every hidden path led toward someone who had benefited from her disappearance. Footsteps sounded behind her. Lucian entered carrying a sealed packet of correspondence. His expression revealed little. Aurelia had learned enough by now to know that usually meant trouble. "Please tell me Lord Cedric has decided to leave England." A faint shadow of amusement appeared briefly. "Unfortunately not." Aurelia sighed. "It was worth hoping." Lucian set the documents on the table. "We received a message from Henry Whitlock before dawn. That immediately caught her attention." "Is he well?" "Yes." Lucian removed one letter from the stack. But he remembered something. Silence settled over the room. Memories had become valuable currency lately. Sometimes they changed everything. Aurelia stepped closer. What did he remember? Lucian handed her the letter. She read carefully. The handwriting appeared rushed. Several sections had been added between existing lines as though the thought arrived suddenly during the night. Aurelia reached the final paragraph and stopped. Her pulse quickened. There was another servant. Lucian nodded. A nursery maid. Aurelia looked up immediately. The woman from Scotland? No. His voice remained steady. Someone else. Hope and uncertainty collided inside her chest. Alive. Possibly. The single word changed everything. Aurelia looked back at the letter. Henry claimed another employee survived the fire. A young nursery maid named Clara Hastings. According to his recollection, Clara helped evacuate children from the East Wing shortly before the manor collapsed. More importantly, she may have witnessed what happened after Aurelia disappeared. May have, Aurelia repeated quietly. Lucian folded his arms. It has been 18 years. People forget. Sometimes. His gaze shifted toward the rain-covered windows. Sometimes they remember exactly what they wish they could forget. The observation lingered between them. Aurelia lowered the letter. Where is she? That is the problem. Her stomach tightened. There was always a problem. No one knows. Not yet. Lucian crossed toward the fireplace. Henry lost contact with her shortly after the fire. Aurelia stared at the map again. Somewhere in England, another person carried part of her story. Another witness. Another fragment of truth hidden beneath nearly 2 decades of silence. The possibility felt overwhelming. Before either could continue, a knock interrupted the room. Mrs. Hollowmere entered carrying a silver tray. Several calling cards rested neatly upon it. Her expression suggested she would rather have thrown them into the Thames. Visitors? Aurelia asked. Unfortunately, Mrs. Hollowmere handed over the cards. Lucian examined them one at a time. His expression darkened slightly. Interesting. Aurelia already disliked the sound of that. What happened? Mrs. Hollowmere answered first. Several ladies of society have requested introductions. Aurelia blinked. To me? Yes. Suspicion arrived immediately. For days earlier, London wanted nothing to do with her. Now invitations had begun appearing. Not social invitations. Curiosity invitations. The distinction mattered. Lucian glanced at the names. Lady Mercer, Lady Davenport, Lady Ellsworth. Aurelia recognized none of them. Mrs. Hollowmere did. Her expression remained unimpressed. Professional collectors of gossip. The answer explained everything. Aurelia laughed softly despite herself. How flattering. Lucian placed the cards aside. You will not meet them. Agreed. Mrs. Hollowmere looked relieved. Excellent. Another silence followed. Then a servant appeared at the doorway. Your Grace. Lucian turned. Yes. A messenger has arrived. The footman hesitated. From Parliament. The atmosphere inside the library tightened instantly. Lucian accepted the document moments later. Aurelia watched carefully as he broke the seal. Whatever he expected to find, it was not what he found. His eyes narrowed slightly. That is unusual. Aurelia crossed toward him. What now? He handed over the notice. She scanned the contents. A formal request for witness registration. All individuals connected to the Ashbourne inquiry would be required to submit testimony before the hearing. Names, statements, background histories, everything. Aurelia frowned. This seems normal. Read the final page. She turned it over. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. A new witness had already registered. The name appeared alone at the bottom of the document. Clara Hastings. Silence filled the room. Aurelia stared at the paper. Then read it again. The name remained. Real. Impossible. Important. She looked up sharply. She is alive. Lucian's expression remained guarded. Apparently. And she contacted Parliament. Yes. Hope surged through Aurelia so quickly it almost hurt. For months she had chased shadows. Fragments. Lost records. Rumors. Now an actual witness had emerged on her own. Someone connected directly to the night everything changed. Mrs. Hollowmere stepped closer. Where is she? Lucian accepted the notice again. His eyes moved toward another section. Then his expression hardened. Aurelia noticed immediately. So did the housekeeper. What is wrong? Lucian lowered the page slowly. She is already in London. The room became very still. Aurelia felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. London. Not hundreds of miles away. Not hidden in Scotland. Here. Close enough to reach. Close enough for House Vale to reach as well. The realization arrived instantly. We need to find her. Yes. Lucian crossed toward the desk. His movements had become quicker now. More focused. Before someone else does. Mrs. Hollowmere nodded immediately. I will contact our solicitor. Do that. The housekeeper departed moments later, leaving Aurelia and Lucian alone once more. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The city beyond looked blurred and distant. Yet somewhere within that gray maze of streets and buildings, a woman named Clara Hastings carried answers. Aurelia looked toward Lucian. Do you think she remembers me? The question sounded smaller than intended. More vulnerable. Lucian remained silent several seconds before answering. I think she registered as a witness for a reason. Aurelia lowered her gaze. The answer was careful. Honest. Not false hope. Somehow that helped more. The hours passed quickly afterward. Messages arrived. Servants came and went. Solicitors exchanged correspondence. London moved around them like a machine that never truly rested. By late afternoon, the rain had finally begun to ease. Aurelia stood near the drawing-room window when another carriage arrived outside. She barely noticed at first. Visitors had become common lately. Then she saw the Ravenshire footman hurry toward the entrance with unusual urgency. Something felt different. Minutes later, Mrs. Hollowmere entered the room. For the first time in weeks, genuine surprise showed on her face. Your Grace. Lucian looked up from his paperwork. What is it? The housekeeper hesitated. That alone was enough to command attention. A woman has arrived requesting an audience. Aurelia felt immediate tension. Who? Mrs. Hollowmere looked directly toward her. She says her name is Clara Hastings. Silence crashed through the room. No one moved. For a moment, even the ticking clock near the mantel seemed too loud. Aurelia stared at the housekeeper, certain she had misheard. Now? Mrs. Hollowmere nodded. She insists the matter cannot wait. Lucian rose immediately. Aurelia did the same. Every question, every fear, Every possibility suddenly stood on the other side of a door. Mrs. Hollowmere stepped aside. She is waiting in the blue salon. No one wasted another second. They crossed the corridor together. Aurelia barely noticed the paintings lining the walls. Her heartbeat drowned out everything else. Clara Hastings, a survivor, a witness, someone who might remember the child she used to be. They reached the salon moments later. Lucian opened the door. Aurelia stepped inside and stopped instantly. A woman stood near the window overlooking the square. She appeared to be in her 40s now, modestly dressed, composed, yet unmistakably nervous. At the sound of the door, she turned. Her eyes moved immediately toward Aurelia. The color drained from her face. Not fear, recognition. The room fell silent. Clara lifted one trembling hand toward her mouth. Tears appeared before she spoke a single word. Then her voice broke softly through 18 years of distance. My God! Aurelia could not breathe. Clara stared at her as though seeing a ghost return from the dead. Finally the woman whispered the sentence that changed everything. You have your mother's eyes. For a moment, nobody in the room moved. Rain tapped softly against the salon windows while London traffic rolled through the square beyond. Yet all of it seemed impossibly distant. Aurelia stood frozen near the doorway, staring at the woman who had survived the same night that had stolen 18 years from her life. Clara Hastings looked equally stunned. Tears glistened in her eyes as she struggled to compose herself. I am sorry, she whispered. I did not expect. Her voice faltered. Aurelia understood. Neither of them had expected this. Not truly. Clara had registered as a witness. She had prepared herself for legal questions. Statements. Evidence. Facts. Not this. Not standing face to face with the child she believed lost forever. Lucian quietly closed the salon door behind them. The sound seemed to restore movement to the room. Clara lowered her hand and took a careful breath. You look so much like her. Aurelia swallowed. My mother. Clara nodded immediately. Emotion softened her expression, especially around the eyes. Silence followed. The words settled heavily inside Aurelia's chest. Over the past weeks, she had heard descriptions of Evelyn Ashbourne from journals, records, and servants. Yet this felt different, personal, immediate, real. Clara had known her mother. She had spoken with her, laughed with her, shared ordinary moments now lost forever. Aurelia slowly crossed the room. You knew my family? Very well. Clara's voice remained gentle. I worked in the nursery for nearly 6 years. Mrs. Hollowmere quietly directed everyone toward the seating area near the fireplace. Tea appeared almost immediately. Nobody touched it. The atmosphere felt too fragile for ordinary rituals. Clara settled into one chair while Aurelia took the seat opposite her. Lucian remained standing nearby, silent, observant, protective in the way he often became when uncertainty filled a room. Clara looked toward Aurelia again. For several seconds, she simply studied her face, as though comparing memory against reality. Finally she smiled faintly. You always hated sleeping. Aurelia blinked. The unexpected observation caught her completely off guard. Clara laughed softly. Every nursemaid in Ashbourne knew it. A warmth stirred unexpectedly inside Aurelia. Small, fragile. I did. You preferred stories. Clara's smile deepened slightly. Especially stories about ships. Aurelia stared at her. Something shifted quietly in the back of her mind. Not a memory exactly. More like an echo. The feeling. Waves. Lantern light. A voice reading aloud. She looked down at her hands. I do not remember. Clara's expression saddened. I know. Silence followed. Then Lucian spoke. You came because of the inquiry. Clara immediately nodded. The atmosphere changed. Softer emotions gave way to purpose. Yes. She folded her hands carefully. I should have come years ago. Why did you not? Lucian asked. Clara looked toward the rain-streaked window. Her answer took several seconds. Because I was afraid. No one judged her for that. Fear had already shaped too many lives connected to Ashbourne. Clara continued. After the fire, people began asking questions. Her voice lowered slightly. Questions that felt dangerous. Aurelia felt tension return immediately. Dangerous how? Clara hesitated. Then she met Aurelia's gaze directly. Because some people were more interested in whether you survived than whether you were safe. The room became still. Aurelia already knew the implication. Yet hearing it from another witness made the truth harder to ignore. Clara exhaled slowly. I left England shortly afterward. For how long? Lucian asked. Nearly 15 years. Mrs. Hollowmere looked surprised. Where? America. The answer startled Aurelia. Clara noticed. My husband had family there. She offered a faint smile. It seemed far enough away. Silence followed. Then Aurelia asked the question that mattered most. Do you remember the night of the fire? Every trace of warmth disappeared from Clara's face. The room seemed colder suddenly. Even the rain outside sounded sharper. Clara looked down briefly before answering. Every day. The words carried no hesitation, no uncertainty. Memory had never left her. Aurelia leaned forward slightly. Her pulse quickened. Lucian remained completely still. Clara gathered herself carefully. The household knew something was wrong before the fire began. Aurelia frowned. How? Clara looked toward the fireplace. Visitors. The answer immediately captured everyone's attention. What visitors? Lucian asked. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly as she searched old memories. Several arrived during the week before Christmas. Aurelia exchanged a glance with Lucian. Christmas. The same time period recorded in the journals. The same period connected to inheritance negotiations. Clara continued. Most were expected. Her voice slowed. One was not. Silence settled over the room. Aurelia felt her heartbeat quicken. Who? Clara hesitated. Not because she had forgotten, because she remembered too well. Alistair Vale. The name landed heavily. No one spoke. No one needed to. They all understood the significance. Seraphine's brother. Evelyn Ashbourne's former fiancé. The man already connected to multiple suspicions. Clara folded her hands more tightly. He arrived without invitation. Lucian's expression hardened immediately. Are you certain? Clara looked toward him. I served tea in the drawing room that afternoon. Her answer came without hesitation. I heard the argument myself. Aurelia stared at her. Argument? Clara nodded slowly. Between Lord Ashbourne and Alistair Vale. The room fell silent once more. Every person present understood the importance of what came next. Clara looked down briefly before continuing. I could not hear everything. Her voice remained steady. But I remember one sentence clearly. Aurelia leaned forward. So did Lucian. Clara's eyes moved toward the fire. Then she repeated the words exactly as she remembered them. The child changes everything. The room seemed to stop breathing. Aurelia felt cold move through her chest. The child. Her. Clara continued quietly. Lord Ashbourne became furious. Lucian's jaw tightened faintly. What happened afterward? The meeting ended. Clara looked toward the window again. Alistair left. She paused. Or at least everyone believed he left. Silence followed. Then another realization surfaced. Aurelia felt it immediately. You think he stayed? Clara's expression darkened. I know he stayed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the glass. Clara lowered her voice. I saw him again that night. Lucian stepped closer. Where? Near the east wing. The answer sent a chill through the room. Aurelia stared at her. East wing. The children's wing. Her wing. Clara continued. He was not alone. Silence crashed through the salon. Lucian's eyes sharpened instantly. Who was with him? Clara opened her mouth, then stopped. Something changed in her expression. Not uncertainty. Fear. Old fear. The kind that survives decades. Aurelia noticed immediately. Clara? The former nursemaid looked directly at her. Tears shimmered once more in her eyes. That is why I finally came forward. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Because for 18 years I believed I imagined it. No one interrupted. Clara swallowed carefully. Then she spoke the sentence that shattered everything they thought they understood. The second man was wearing a Ravenshire crest. Silence consumed the room. Absolute. Complete. Even the rain seemed to disappear. Aurelia stared at Clara, certain she had misheard. Lucien stood motionless beside the fireplace. His face revealed nothing. Yet the stillness itself felt dangerous. Clara looked between them. I never told anyone. Her voice trembled slightly now. Not even my husband. Nobody answered, because one impossible question now hung over the room. If a Ravenshire stood beside Alistair Vale near the east wing on the night of the fire, then someone connected to Blackmere had been there when everything began. And suddenly the line separating ally from enemy no longer looked nearly as clear as it once had. The silence lasted long after Clara finished speaking. Rain continued falling beyond the salon windows. Somewhere in the square outside, carriage wheels rolled across wet stone streets. Life in London continued as though nothing had changed. Yet inside Ravenshire House, everything had changed. Aurelia sat perfectly still, a Ravenshire crest. The words echoed through her thoughts again and again. Across the room, Lucien remained motionless beside the fireplace. His expression revealed almost nothing. Only someone who knew him well would have noticed the tension gathering beneath that calm exterior. Clara lowered her eyes. I understand how it sounds. No one answered immediately. Finally, Mrs. Hollowmere spoke. Did you recognize the man? Clara shook her head. No. Relief flickered briefly through the room before disappearing. The answer solved nothing. Lucien folded his arms. Describe him. Clara closed her eyes for a moment. 18 years had passed. Memory had become fragmented in places. Yet some details remained stubbornly clear. He was tall. She opened her eyes again. Broad shoulders. Dark coat. Older than Lord Alistair Vale. Aurelia glanced toward Lucien. The description could fit dozens of men. Hundreds, perhaps. Clara continued. I only saw him briefly. Her voice remained steady. But I noticed the crest because the moonlight caught the silver embroidery. Lucien nodded slowly. And you are certain it was Ravenshire? Yes. The answer came immediately. I grew up in Northumberland. Everyone recognized the Ravenshire crest. Silence settled once more. Aurelia looked toward the fire. A few days earlier she would have panicked at such a revelation. Now she felt something else. Weariness. Every answer uncovered another hidden door. Every hidden door revealed another corridor of questions. Lucien finally broke the silence. Did either man see you? Clara hesitated, then shook her head. I do not believe so. You are certain? As certain as anyone can be after 18 years. Lucien accepted the limitation without argument. Memory was imperfect. Everyone in the room understood that. Yet one fact remained impossible to ignore. A Ravenshire had been near the east wing with Alistair Vale on the night everything changed. Aurelia looked toward Lucien. He met her gaze immediately. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The same question existed between them. Could someone from House Ravenshire have been involved? A servant arrived moments later announcing that the family solicitor had arrived. The interruption felt almost welcome. Everyone needed air, space, distance from the weight of Clara's revelation. Within 15 minutes, the library had become the center of another emergency conference. Maps covered the main table. Witness statements lay stacked beside legal records. Clara's testimony occupied the place of honor at the center. Mr. Hargrove, Ravenshire's solicitor, adjusted his spectacles while reviewing notes. His expression grew increasingly troubled. This changes the inquiry. Lucien stood beside the window overlooking the square. Explain. The solicitor cleared his throat. Until now, House Vale appeared isolated. He tapped Clara's statement. If a Ravenshire connection exists, the opposition will exploit it immediately. Aurelia frowned. Even if we do not know who the man was? Especially then. Mr. Hargrove sighed. Uncertainty creates opportunity. Nobody disagreed. The past several weeks had proven that repeatedly. Clara sat quietly near the fireplace while the discussion continued around her. She looked exhausted now. Relieved perhaps, yet exhausted. Carrying a secret for 18 years could not have been easy. Aurelia crossed the room and offered her a cup of tea. Clara accepted with a grateful smile. "Thank you." Aurelia settled into the chair beside her. For a few moments, neither woman spoke. The legal debate continued elsewhere in the room. Voices rose and fell. Documents changed hands. Strategies formed and dissolved. Clara stared into her teacup. "You are wondering whether you should trust him." The statement caught Aurelia off guard. She turned toward the older woman. "What?" Clara glanced toward Lucien. He remained across the room speaking with the solicitor. "The Duke." Aurelia immediately looked away. "I know who you mean." A faint smile touched Clara's lips. "Of course you do." Silence followed. Then Clara's expression softened. "For what it is worth, I do not believe he knew." Aurelia frowned slightly. "Knew what?" "About the man I saw." Clara's voice lowered. "Whatever happened 18 years ago?" Aurelia stared at the fire. The question had already crossed her mind. More than once. Yet every time she considered it, the answer felt obvious. Lucien had spent 14 years searching for the missing Ashbourne heir. He had protected her when walking away would have been easier. He had sacrificed political alliances, social standing, influence. None of those actions matched guilt. Clara seemed to read part of her thoughts. People who hide the truth rarely spend years trying to uncover it. Aurelia glanced toward Lucien again. Across the room, he was studying witness records with complete concentration. Determined, focused, unwavering. Something tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Not uncertainty. The opposite. Before she could examine the feeling further, another knock interrupted the room. A footman entered carrying a sealed document. "Your Grace." Lucien accepted the correspondence immediately. One glance at the seal altered his expression. "Parliament." Mr. Hargrove straightened. "Already?" Lucien broke the seal. Silence settled over the room as he read. The atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. Finally, Aurelia stood. "What happened?" Lucien lowered the page. "The witness review begins tomorrow morning." Several people spoke at once. The solicitor looked stunned. Mrs. Hollowmere looked furious. Aurelia felt cold spread through her chest. "Tomorrow." Lucien nodded. House Vale petitioned for an accelerated schedule. Mr. Hargrove muttered something unflattering beneath his breath. Nobody corrected him. The solicitor reached for the notice. "That leaves almost no preparation time." "That is likely the intention." Lucien handed over the document. Aurelia looked toward Clara. "Will you testify?" The older woman answered without hesitation. "Yes." Relief moved quietly through the room. At least one thing remained certain. Clara had finally chosen a side. The afternoon disappeared beneath preparations. Statements were reviewed. Witness lists were organized. Correspondence flew across London. Yet despite the constant activity, a strange tension lingered beneath everything. The Ravenshire revelation remained unresolved. Nobody ignored it. Nobody understood it either. By evening, exhaustion settled over the household. Aurelia found herself standing alone in the library shortly after sunset. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. Rain had finally stopped. London shimmered beneath damp streets and scattered lanterns. She stared at the reflection in the glass. Not a maid. Not quite a lady. Not fully an Ashbourne yet. Somewhere between all three. The library door opened quietly behind her. She already knew who it was. Lucien rarely announced himself when no one else was present. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now, comfortable in ways she had never expected. "You should rest," he said eventually. Aurelia smiled faintly. "That advice sounds familiar. Because you continue ignoring it." She turned toward him. Firelight softened the sharp lines of his face. For the first time all day he looked tired. Truly tired. "Do you think the witness review will help?" she asked. Lucien considered the question. Yes. Even after what Clara revealed? His gaze remained steady. Yes. Aurelia searched his expression carefully. "You are not worried?" A faint shadow crossed his features. Not quite a smile. Not quite resignation. "I am worried about many things." He paused. "You are not one of them." The answer settled deeply inside her chest. Dangerous words. Simple words. Yet somehow more powerful than grand declarations. Aurelia looked away first. Not because she wished to, because holding his gaze suddenly felt difficult. The silence stretched between them. Neither seemed eager to break it. Then rapid footsteps echoed from the corridor. Both turned toward the doorway immediately. A servant appeared moments later. Pale, breathless, alarmed. The atmosphere changed at once. "Your Grace." Lucien straightened. "What is it?" The footman swallowed hard. "There has been a problem." Every nerve in Aurelia's body tightened. Lucien stepped forward. "Explain." The servant looked toward Clara's witness statement resting on the library table. Then back toward the Duke. "One of the registered witnesses has disappeared." Silence crashed through the room. Absolute. Immediate. Lucien's expression hardened. "Which witness?" The footman's answer arrived a second later. And the moment it did, every plan they had made began to unravel. Henry Whitlock. People rarely disappear by accident the night before they are scheduled to testify. That thought settled over Ravenshire House like a storm cloud that refused to move. The library remained silent long after the footman delivered the news. Aurelia stood frozen beside the window. Across the room, Lucien's expression had become unreadable. Not calm, not angry, something colder, more dangerous. The footman shifted uneasily beneath the weight of everyone's attention. "Repeat exactly what happened," Lucien said. His voice remained steady. The servant swallowed. "A message arrived from Edinburgh less than an hour ago." He extended a folded letter. "Mr. Whitlock left his lodging yesterday morning and never returned." Silence followed. Lucien accepted the correspondence and read quickly. Aurelia watched his eyes move across the page. Whatever details the letter contained did not improve the situation. Mr. Hargrove rose from his chair. "Was there any sign of illness?" "No." Lucien folded the paper. "No sign of travel plans either." Clara lowered her teacup slowly. Her face had gone pale. "He knew he was expected in London." "Yes," Lucien replied. "Which is why this timing concerns me." No one disagreed. Henry Whitlock had survived 18 years carrying evidence connected to House Ashbourne. He had finally stepped forward. Now, less than 48 hours before appearing publicly, he was gone. Aurelia moved toward the table. "Do we know where he was last seen?" Lucien handed the letter to Mr. Hargrove. "Near the Harbour District." The solicitor frowned immediately. "That area contains dozens of boarding houses and hundreds of exits from the city." Lucien crossed toward the fireplace. "Which makes the situation less than ideal." Aurelia stared at the flames. Her first reaction had been fear. Now another possibility emerged. What if he left voluntarily? Several heads turned toward her. She continued carefully. What if someone frightened him? Clara's expression darkened. That happens more often than people admit. The room fell quiet again. The possibility felt plausible. Too plausible. Henry had spent nearly 2 decades protecting documents and secrets. He knew better than anyone how dangerous the truth could become. Yet something still felt wrong. Lucien seemed to reach the same conclusion. Perhaps. He paused. But Henry Whitlock chose to come forward knowing the risks. Aurelia understood what he meant. Fear might delay a person. It rarely erased determination that had survived 18 years. Another knock interrupted the discussion. Mrs. Hollowmere entered carrying a small stack of newspapers. Her expression immediately warned everyone that the evening was about to worsen. "More rumors?" Lucien asked. "More than rumors." She placed the newspapers on the table. Aurelia recognized the headline before she even reached the article. Questions surround missing Ashbourne witness. Her stomach tightened. The story had already escaped into public view. She scanned several paragraphs quickly. Anonymous sources suggested Henry Whitlock's disappearance reflected growing concerns regarding the credibility of the Ashbourne claim. Another article implied witnesses were abandoning Aurelia's cause after discovering inconsistencies. None of it contained proof. None of it needed proof. Rumors rarely waited for facts. Mr. Hargrove muttered something beneath his breath. Mrs. Hollowmere looked equally unimpressed. Lucian simply folded the newspaper and set it aside. House Vale moves quickly. Clara looked toward him. You think they leaked the story? I think someone wanted the public discussing Henry's disappearance before the inquiry begins. His answer required little interpretation. Aurelia sank into a nearby chair. Every victory seemed temporary. Every answer produced another obstacle. First the missing records. Then the social exclusion. Then the Ravenshire mystery. Now Henry. The room suddenly felt very small. Clara studied her quietly. Do not let them exhaust you. Aurelia looked up. The older woman's voice remained gentle. That is another way people lose. The observation struck deeper than expected. Because exhaustion had become familiar lately. Constant questions. Constant uncertainty. Constant battles. Clara offered a faint smile. You are still here. Aurelia glanced toward the newspapers. Some days that feels like a surprisingly difficult accomplishment. A few people smiled despite the circumstances. Even Lucian. Briefly. The moment passed almost immediately. Yet it lightened the atmosphere just enough for everyone to breathe again. The discussion continued late into the evening. Witness statements were reviewed. Possible locations were identified. Messengers were dispatched. By 10 o'clock, Ravenshire House resembled a military headquarters more than a family residence. Servants carried correspondence between rooms. Solicitors arrived and departed. Maps covered nearly every available surface. Through it all, Henry remained missing. Near midnight, the household finally grew quieter. Most of the visitors departed. Clara retired to a guest room. Mrs. Hollowmere disappeared upstairs after ensuring everyone had eaten something. Aurelia wandered into the library once more. She found Lucian alone beside the long table covered in documents. Several lamps cast warm circles of light across the room. Outside, London had settled into uneasy silence. You should sleep, she said. Lucian looked up from a stack of papers. You first. Aurelia almost smiled. That sounds familiar. Because you continue ignoring reasonable advice. She crossed toward the table. For a moment neither spoke. Then her eyes landed on a large map spread across the center. Several locations had been marked in ink. Edinburgh, Blackmere, Ashbourne, London. Threads connecting years of secrets, years of lies, years of missing people. Do you ever feel as though the truth does not wish to be found? She asked quietly. Lucian leaned back slightly. The question seemed to surprise him. No. Aurelia raised an eyebrow. No. The truth always exists. His gaze shifted toward the map. People simply build walls around it. She considered that. Somehow it sounded exactly like something he would believe. And you intend to tear down every wall? A faint shadow crossed his expression. If necessary. The answer should not have comforted her. Somehow it did. Silence settled between them again. Comfortable this time. Familiar. The library clock ticked softly in the background. Then Aurelia noticed something partially hidden beneath a stack of correspondence. A leather-bound ledger. Old. Worn. Different from the other documents. She pointed toward it. What is that? Lucian followed her gaze. For the first time all evening, genuine surprise appeared on his face. That should not be here. Aurelia frowned. What do you mean? He crossed toward the ledger immediately. The worn cover bore no title. No family crest. Nothing except age. Lucian picked it up carefully. His eyes narrowed. This was not among our records this morning. Unease stirred instantly. Then where did it come from? Before he could answer, a folded note slipped from between the pages and landed on the table. Both stared at it. Neither touched it immediately. Finally, Lucien unfolded the paper. The message contained only one sentence. Find page 47. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Silence filled the library. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. Who delivered it? Lucien flipped through the front pages. I do not know. The ledger looked ancient. Handwritten entries filled every page. Dates, names, estate transactions, household accounts. Yet something about it felt important. Deliberately important. Aurelia moved beside him. Together they turned pages until the number appeared. 47. The paper felt thinner there. More worn, as though frequently handled. Lucien stopped. The room became very still. Aurelia stared at the entry, then read it again. Her heartbeat quickened with every line. The page recorded private financial transfers made during the months preceding the Ashbourne fire. Several names appeared repeatedly. Noble houses, estate agents, business intermediaries. Most meant nothing to her. One did. House Vale. Lucien's jaw tightened immediately. Aurelia continued reading. Then another name appeared. Her breath caught. House Ravenshire. Silence crashed through the room. The ledger slipped slightly beneath her fingers. House Vale and House Ravenshire. Together. On the same page. Connected through transactions hidden nearly 2 decades earlier. Aurelia looked toward Lucien. He had gone completely still. The air seemed to leave the room. Neither spoke. Because one impossible possibility now sat between them. Clara had seen a Ravenshire crest near the east wing. Henry Whitlock had disappeared. And now an anonymous ledger linked both families months before the fire. Lucien slowly turned the page. A folded document fell free and landed on the table. Smaller than the others. Older. Sealed with faded wax. Aurelia stared at it. So did Lucien. The seal had partially cracked with age. Yet one detail remained unmistakable. The symbol pressed into the wax was not Ashbourne. It was not Vale. It was not Ravenshire. Aurelia felt a chill move through her chest as she recognized the crest from Henry Whitlock's testimony and Clara's memories. The mark belonged to a family no one had mentioned in years. And suddenly the mystery surrounding House Ashbourne had become far larger than any of them imagined. The crest belonged to House Blackthorne. Aurelia recognized it only because she had seen the symbol once before in an old estate register at Blackmere Hall. A raven surrounded by thorned branches. Obscure. Forgotten. Nearly extinct within aristocratic circles. Yet somehow connected to a ledger hidden for 18 years. The library seemed colder as she stared at the faded wax seal resting beneath the lamplight. Across from her, Lucien remained silent. His eyes never left the document. Blackthorne, Aurelia whispered. Lucien nodded once. Yes. I thought the family disappeared years ago. Most people do. His voice carried a different tone now. Not uncertainty. Recognition. That immediately caught her attention. Aurelia looked toward him. You know something. Lucien remained silent for several seconds. Then he exhaled slowly. Not much. That is not an answer. A faint shadow crossed his face. No, it is not. He carefully lifted the sealed document from the table. The aged paper looked fragile enough to fall apart in careless hands. Aurelia watched him examine the crest. My father mentioned House Blackthorne once. The statement surprised her. Lucien rarely spoke about his father unless necessary. When? Years ago. His gaze remained fixed on the seal. Before I began searching for the Ashbourne heir. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. What did he say? Lucien's expression darkened slightly. That some families disappear because history forgets them. He paused. Others disappear because someone wants them forgotten. Silence settled over the room. The words carried familiar weight. Too familiar. Aurelia stared at the document. Forgotten families. Erased records. Missing heirs. The pattern no longer felt accidental. Before either could continue, footsteps echoed outside the library. Mrs. Hollowmere entered carrying a lamp. She immediately sensed the atmosphere. What happened? Aurelia pointed toward the ledger. We found something. The housekeeper crossed the room. Moments later, her eyes widened. Good heavens! She recognized the crest too. Lucian handed her the ledger opened to page 47. Mrs. Hollowmere reviewed the entries carefully. Her expression grew more troubled with every line. House Vale. House Ravenshire. Blackthorn Intermediaries. She looked up slowly. This cannot be coincidence. No, Lucian agreed. It cannot. Silence followed. Then Mrs. Hollowmere pointed toward one particular entry near the bottom of the page. Aurelia had overlooked it initially. Now she leaned closer. A date. December 19th, 18 years earlier. Only 3 days before the Ashbourne fire. A payment had been transferred through a Blackthorn holding account. The recipient's name had been partially obscured by water damage. Yet enough remained visible to read the first word. Alistair. The room became very still. Aurelia felt cold spread through her chest. Alistair Vale. The name sat there like a shadow stretching across 2 decades. Lucian's jaw tightened. That is not enough for court. No, Mrs. Hollowmere replied. But it is enough to ask questions. Aurelia stared at the page. Questions had driven her life for weeks. Yet this felt different. This felt closer to an answer. The sealed Blackthorn document rested nearby. Waiting. Silent. Dangerous. Lucian finally reached for it. There is only one way to find out. The wax seal cracked softly beneath careful pressure. Aurelia held her breath. The room seemed to shrink around the table. Even Mrs. Hollowmere leaned forward slightly. Lucian unfolded the contents slowly. Several sheets emerged. Old correspondence. Financial records. One handwritten letter. The handwriting appeared elegant. Familiar somehow. Yet Aurelia could not immediately place it. Lucian's expression changed the moment he began reading. Surprise appeared first. Then disbelief. Then something colder. Aurelia's pulse quickened. What is it? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed her the letter. Aurelia accepted it carefully. Her eyes moved across the first lines. Then stopped. The letter had been addressed to Alistair Vale. She continued reading. Every sentence tightened the knot already forming in her chest. The correspondence discussed inheritance negotiations, estate transfers, private agreements. Yet one passage stood apart from all the others. If the Ashbourne succession proceeds as expected, Ravenshire interests will remain protected. Aurelia stared at the sentence. Then read it again. Protected. Not expanded. Not increased. Protected. The wording mattered. It suggested fear. Risk. Something worth losing. She looked toward Lucian. What does this mean? His answer came quietly. It means House Ashbourne was standing in someone's way. The library fell silent again. Aurelia lowered the page. The mystery that had once seemed personal now appeared far larger. Not simply an inheritance dispute. Not merely a missing child. Something involving multiple families. Multiple estates. Multiple fortunes. Mrs. Hollowmere pointed toward the signature at the bottom of the letter. Look! Aurelia followed her gaze. Her breath caught. The signature belonged neither to Alistair Vale nor to a Blackthorn family member. It belonged to a man named Edmund Blackthorn, a name she had never heard. Yet Lucian clearly had. His expression hardened immediately. My father knew him. Aurelia looked up sharply. Personally? Yes. The answer landed heavily. Lucian moved toward the window overlooking the dark square outside. For several moments he said nothing. Then he spoke without turning around. Edmund Blackthorn died 2 months after the fire. Aurelia felt another chill. How? Officially. Lucian's voice remained calm. A riding accident. Mrs. Hollowmere looked unconvinced. And unofficially? Lucian finally turned. No one ever believed it. Silence followed. The implications piled upon one another until the room felt difficult to breathe inside. Missing heirs. Dead witnesses. Forgotten families. Financial arrangements hidden through intermediary accounts. Nothing resembled coincidence anymore. The library clock struck 1 in the morning. The sound echoed softly through the room. Aurelia looked down at the remaining documents. Several pages still waited unread. Lucien returned to the table. Together they reviewed each sheet carefully. Most contained financial records, dates, signatures, transactions. Yet one final document appeared different. Smaller, personal, folded separately from the others. Lucien opened it carefully. The handwriting matched the previous letter. Edmund Blackthorne again. This time the message was unfinished. Several lines ended abruptly, as though interrupted. Aurelia read silently. If anything happens to me, the truth regarding Ashbourne must remain hidden until the child can be protected. The room seemed to stop breathing. Aurelia stared at the words. The child. Her. Lucien continued reading. The danger does not come solely from Vale. There are others involved. Some believe they act for preservation, others for profit. Neither understands the cost. Aurelia felt her heartbeat hammering. Finally she reached the last complete sentence. The one that changed everything. The Ravenshire heir knows nothing. He must never be blamed for the decisions of his elders. Silence crashed through the library. Absolute. Complete. Lucien remained motionless. Aurelia looked up slowly. The sentence echoed through her thoughts. The Ravenshire heir knows nothing. 18 years ago, the Ravenshire heir had been a boy. Lucien. A long breath escaped her before she realized she had been holding it. Mrs. Hollowmere closed her eyes briefly. Relief. Genuine relief. The letter did not erase every question. It did not explain the Ravenshire crest Clara had seen. It did not reveal who stood beside Alistair Vale near the East Wing. Yet it confirmed one crucial truth. Lucien had never been part of the conspiracy. He had been another person left in the dark. Another person carrying consequences created by older generations. Lucien stared at the document for several seconds, then looked away. Something complicated moved behind his expression. Not vindication, sadness perhaps, or disappointment. Aurelia understood. Sometimes innocence brought its own burden. Before anyone could speak, another sound interrupted the room. Rapid footsteps approached the library. A knock followed immediately. Sharp. Urgent. Everyone turned toward the door. A footman entered. Breathless. Pale. Alarm visible on his face. Lucien straightened at once. What happened? The servant swallowed hard. A messenger arrived from Parliament. No one moved. The footman extended a sealed notice. The witness review scheduled for tomorrow morning has been suspended. Aurelia frowned. Why? The servant looked directly at Lucien, then at the Blackthorne documents spread across the table. Because Lord Cedric Vale has submitted new evidence. Silence followed. Heavy. Immediate. Lucien accepted the notice and broke the seal. His eyes moved quickly across the page. Then he froze. Aurelia's pulse quickened. What is it? Lucien lowered the document slowly. The color had drained from his face. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded colder than she had ever heard it. Cedric claims he has found the original Ashbourne birth records. Silence crashed through the room once more, and for the first time since discovering the Blackthorne ledger, Aurelia realized the battle was about to become far more dangerous than either side expected. By sunrise, every newspaper in London seemed to be carrying the same story. Cedric Vale had found the original Ashbourne birth records. The claim spread through drawing rooms, breakfast tables, government offices, and private clubs before most people had finished their morning tea. Ravenshire House woke beneath a cloud of uncertainty. Aurelia stood beside the dining room window, staring at the grey city beyond the glass while a folded newspaper rested untouched on the table beside her. She did not need to read the article. She already knew the headline. The servants knew it. The solicitors knew it. Half of England knew it. Yet knowing did not make it easier. The doors opened quietly behind her. Lucien entered carrying several documents beneath one arm. His expression revealed that he had already spent hours dealing with the consequences. Aurelia turned toward him. Is it real? He set the papers down before answering. I do not know. The honesty somehow felt worse than reassurance. Aurelia lowered her gaze. Then we are back where we started. No. Lucien's answer came immediately. We are not. She looked up. Why not? He unfolded one of the notices from Parliament. Because yesterday we had questions. His eyes met hers. Today we have evidence. Aurelia almost laughed. Evidence on both sides. Perhaps. He remained calm. But evidence can be examined. Rumors could not. Fear could not. Public opinion rarely could. The distinction mattered. Yet the knot in Aurelia's chest remained. A servant entered moments later carrying fresh correspondence. More letters. More speculation. More demands for statements from people who had ignored her existence only weeks earlier. The servant departed quickly. Lucien glanced through the pile. His expression darkened. Aurelia immediately noticed. What now? He handed over a single envelope. The seal belonged to Parliament. Aurelia opened it carefully and read. Her stomach tightened almost immediately. Cedric Vale had formally requested that the alleged Ashbourne heir appear before a preliminary review panel that afternoon. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. The wording itself felt deliberate. Alleged. Aurelia folded the letter slowly. He wants the public to see me questioned before the full inquiry. Yes. Lucien did not attempt to soften the truth. Why? Because public doubt is useful. The answer required little explanation. If people saw hesitation, uncertainty, or weakness, they would remember it long after evidence was presented. Aurelia moved toward the fireplace. The warmth barely reached her. I spent 18 years not knowing who I was. Her voice remained quiet. Now everyone else seems determined to decide for me. Silence settled between them. Then Lucien crossed the room. Look at me. She did. Immediately. You are not the person on those newspaper pages. His voice remained steady. You are not the rumors. You are not Cedric Vale's version of events. Aurelia held his gaze. Something inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. And if his records are genuine? The question lingered between them. Lucien considered it carefully before answering. Then we examine them. And if they contradict everything? Then we examine them more closely. A faint smile almost appeared despite the circumstances. It vanished quickly. Yet Lucien noticed. The smallest signs of hope rarely escaped his attention. By early afternoon, London seemed determined to watch. Carriages lined the streets surrounding the government building where the review would be held. Journalists lingered near the entrances. Curious spectators gathered behind iron barriers. Aurelia stared through the carriage window and felt the weight of hundreds of unseen eyes. 3 weeks earlier, she had cleaned floors. Now strangers debated her existence. The absurdity of it all nearly overwhelmed her. Lucien sat beside her in silence. Calm. Unmoved. At least outwardly. The carriage finally stopped. Footmen moved immediately. Doors opened. Cold air rushed inside. Aurelia stepped down and heard the distant murmur of the crowd. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Curious. Curiosity could be just as dangerous. They entered the building without speaking. Long corridors stretched ahead. Marble floors echoed beneath measured footsteps. Officials guided them toward a private waiting room. The review panel would convene shortly. Aurelia sat near a tall window while solicitors moved in and out carrying documents. Minutes passed. Then the door opened again. Silence followed immediately. Cedric Vale entered the room. Aurelia recognized him at once despite never having met him personally. Tall, impeccably dressed. Confident in the way powerful men often became when they believed the outcome already favored them. His gaze moved first toward Lucien, then toward Aurelia. A faint smile touched his face. It never reached his eyes. Miss Ashbourne. The title sounded carefully chosen. Not insulting. Not respectful. Lucien stepped forward before Aurelia could respond. Lord Cedric. Cedric's attention returned to the Duke. Ravenshire. Neither man offered a handshake. The omission said enough. Silence settled over the room. Finally Cedric looked toward Aurelia again. "You have caused quite a discussion." Aurelia met his gaze steadily. "I imagine that was difficult for some people." For the first time, genuine surprise flickered across his expression. Only briefly, then the smile returned. "Perhaps." He adjusted his gloves. "The truth often proves inconvenient." The statement hung between them. Lucien's expression hardened slightly. Cedric noticed. Enjoyed it perhaps. Then an official appeared in the doorway announcing that the review would begin. Cedric departed without another word. Yet the tension remained long after he left. The hearing chamber felt smaller than Aurelia expected. Not grand, not theatrical, merely formal. A long table occupied the center. Several officials sat behind stacks of documents. Witnesses waited nearby. Observers filled the rear seats. Aurelia immediately noticed the absence. Henry Whitlock's chair remained empty. The sight struck harder than she anticipated. Another reminder of everything still unresolved. Proceedings began quickly. Questions followed. Dates, records, witness statements. The review itself remained procedural, controlled. Yet every answer seemed to carry deeper consequences. Then Cedric Vale stood. The room grew noticeably quieter. He carried a leather portfolio beneath one arm. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. Cedric approached the center table and carefully removed several documents. 3 days ago, he began. A collection of records was recovered from a private archive connected to House Ashbourne. The officials exchanged glances. Observers leaned forward. Cedric continued. Among these materials were original birth documents previously believed lost. Aurelia watched every movement, every expression, every detail. The portfolio opened. Several papers emerged. Old, yellowed, fragile, genuine at first glance. Cedric handed them to the panel. Silence settled across the room while the officials reviewed the contents. Minutes seemed to pass. Finally, one of the senior reviewers looked up. "These records indicate the Ashbourne child died shortly after the fire." The words struck the room like a stone dropped into still water. Murmurs spread immediately. Aurelia sat perfectly still. Her heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Cedric remained composed. "Yes." The reviewer continued reading. "According to these documents, the child was never recovered because she did not survive." More whispers followed. More uncertainty. Cedric looked toward Aurelia. Not triumphantly, calmly, as though presenting an unavoidable fact. "The tragedy was terrible," he said. "But grief does not alter history." The room seemed to narrow around her. Voices blurred. Faces blurred. For one brief moment, exhaustion overwhelmed everything else. Weeks of fighting. Weeks of defending a life she barely remembered. Weeks of proving she existed. Aurelia lowered her gaze. What if this never ended? What if every answer simply produced another contradiction? Another accusation? Another battle? Across the chamber, Lucien rose slowly to his feet. The movement immediately captured attention. Silence returned. The Duke looked toward the review panel. "May I ask a question?" Permission was granted. Lucien's gaze shifted toward Cedric. "Where were these records found?" Cedric answered smoothly. "A private archive." "Owned by whom?" The smile faded slightly. "That information remains under review." Lucien nodded once. "Convenient." A few observers exchanged glances. Cedric's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting impropriety?" "I am suggesting caution." Lucien's voice remained calm. "Considering that every other Ashbourne record disappeared for 18 years. Silence followed. The point landed exactly where intended. Several officials returned their attention to the documents. Questions began appearing. Dates, chain of custody, authentication procedures. Cedric answered each carefully. Yet something had shifted. The certainty in the room no longer felt absolute. Aurelia watched the exchange unfold. Slowly, she realized something important. Lucien was not fighting because victory was guaranteed. He was fighting because surrender would be easier. and he refused to choose the easier path. The realization settled deeply inside her. The review continued for another hour. By the end, no final decision had been reached. The records would undergo further examination. Additional testimony would be required. Nothing was resolved. Everything remained contested. As the chamber emptied, Aurelia felt exhaustion settle over her shoulders. The emotional weight of the day had become difficult to carry. She moved toward a quiet corridor overlooking the courtyard outside. For several minutes, she simply stood there alone, watching rain clouds drift across the afternoon sky, listening to distant carriage wheels, thinking about the girl she had been, the woman she had become, and all the years that existed between them. Footsteps approached softly behind her. She already knew who it was. Lucien stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Aurelia looked toward him. "What if I am tired of proving myself?" The question emerged more honestly than intended. Lucien remained silent several seconds. Then he answered, "You are allowed to be tired." Aurelia looked away. That was not very encouraging. "No." A faint shadow of warmth entered his voice. It was honest. She laughed quietly despite herself. The sound surprised both of them. Silence followed once more. Then Lucien spoke again. "Do you know what House Vale fears most?" Aurelia shook her head. "Evidence." "No." He looked directly at her. "Persistence." The word lingered. Simple. Powerful. True. Before she could respond, rapid footsteps echoed through the corridor. Both turned immediately. Mr. Hargrove hurried toward them carrying a document. His face revealed excitement. Genuine excitement. The first they had seen in days. "Your Grace." He barely paused for breath. "We found it." Lucien straightened. "Found what?" The solicitor held up a worn sheet of paper. The missing registry reference connected to the Blackthorn ledger. Silence followed. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken instantly. "What does it say?" Mr. Hargrove smiled for the first time all day. Then he handed over the page. Aurelia read the first line. Her breath caught, because the document did not identify a dead child. It identified a living one. And beside the entry, written in faded ink 18 years earlier, appeared a single name. Aurelia Ashbourne. The name had survived. That was the first thought that entered Aurelia's mind as she stared at the faded registry page beneath the corridor lamps. Through 18 years of missing records, vanished witnesses, false reports, hidden ledgers, and carefully constructed lies, one thing remained unchanged. Aurelia Ashbourne, written in ink by a hand long gone, recorded before anyone had reason to doubt her existence, recorded before anyone decided she was inconvenient. Mr. Hargrove stood beside her, breathing slightly harder from his hurried arrival. Lucien accepted the document and examined it carefully. His expression remained controlled. Yet Aurelia noticed the subtle shift in his eyes. Relief, not complete relief. The battle was not over, but relief nonetheless. "Where did you find it?" Lucien asked. "A supplementary registry archive." Mr. Hargrove struggled to contain his excitement. "Referenced inside the Blackthorn records." Aurelia looked up sharply. "Blackthorn again?" "Yes." The solicitor nodded. "The ledger led us there." Lucien continued reading. Several official stamps remained visible despite age. Government markings, registry authentication, administrative references, difficult to forge. More importantly, difficult to explain away. Mr. Hargrove pointed toward the lower section. "There." Aurelia followed his finger. A notation had been added several weeks after the fire. Temporary relocation under protective authority pending inheritance review. Her pulse quickened immediately. Protective authority. Not deceased. Not missing. Protected. The distinction felt enormous. Lucien folded the document carefully. "How many people have seen this?" "Very few." Mr. Hargrove's expression darkened. "I preferred to bring it directly to you." Sensible. Every important document seemed to attract trouble lately. The solicitor glanced toward the nearly empty corridor. "We should return to Ravenshire House." No one disagreed. Less than an hour later, the library once again became the center of their world. Lamps illuminated stacks of evidence spread across the long table. Clara sat near the fireplace reviewing witness statements. Mrs. Hollowmere supervised tea no one remembered to drink. Outside, evening settled over London beneath low clouds and scattered rain. Mr. Hargrove presented the registry document to the group. Silence followed as everyone examined the page. Clara looked up first. Tears appeared unexpectedly in her eyes. "I knew it." Aurelia turned toward her. The older woman smiled softly. "I knew someone protected you." The words settled heavily inside the room. Protected. Not forgotten. Not abandoned. Protected. Yet another question immediately followed. Protected by whom? Lucian seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. The registry confirms relocation. He tapped the notation. But it does not identify the individual responsible. Mrs. Hollowmere nodded slowly. Which means someone still remains hidden. The mystery had narrowed. Not disappeared. Narrowed. That mattered. Mr. Hargrove adjusted his spectacles. "There is more." Everyone looked toward him. The solicitor reached into his case and removed another document. Smaller, less impressive, yet somehow more significant. This was attached to the registry reference. Aurelia accepted the paper carefully. Her eyes moved across the handwriting, then stopped. The note contained only 3 sentences. The child must remain hidden until the agreements collapse. Vale cannot be trusted. Ravenshire must never learn the full arrangement. Silence crashed through the library. Absolute. Immediate. Lucian's expression hardened. Mrs. Hollowmere looked genuinely shocked. Clara stared at the page. "My God!" Aurelia read it again. Then a third time. "The child must remain hidden. Her Vale cannot be trusted." Not surprising. Ravenshire must never learn the full arrangement. That sentence lingered longest, because it suggested something important. House Ravenshire had been deliberately kept ignorant. Not involved. Not informed. Another piece of the puzzle slid quietly into place. Lucian leaned back slightly. Someone was protecting both the child and Ravenshire. Aurelia looked toward him. "Why?" "I do not know." His voice remained calm. But whoever wrote this believed the truth would place both at risk. Silence settled again. The fire crackled softly nearby. London traffic rolled faintly beyond the windows. Then Clara spoke. "There is one person who might know." Every eye turned toward her. The older woman hesitated briefly. Seraphine Vale. The name immediately changed the atmosphere. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. Seraphine. The woman whose shadow seemed to stretch across every major revelation. Not the architect of the conspiracy. Not the victim. Something between. Someone who knew more than she admitted. Lucian's expression revealed nothing. Yet Aurelia noticed the tension returning. Clara continued carefully. She was close to both families. Mrs. Hollowmere nodded reluctantly. Closer than most. Mr. Hargrove folded his arms. The question is whether she would talk. No one answered, because no one knew. Night deepened around Ravenshire House. The discussions continued for hours. Strategies shifted. Evidence was reorganized. Witness timelines were reconstructed. Piece by piece, the story became clearer. Yet one final gap remained. Seraphine. Shortly before midnight, most of the household retired. Clara disappeared upstairs. Mr. Hargrove finally returned home carrying copies of the newest evidence. Mrs. Hollowmere insisted everyone sleep. No one listened. Aurelia found herself standing alone in the drawing room sometime after 11. The city glowed beyond the windows. Hundreds of lights flickered across London. Countless lives. Countless stories. Most untouched by the battle consuming hers. The door opened quietly behind her. She did not need to turn around. Lucian rarely announced himself anymore. "You are still awake." His voice sounded tired. Aurelia smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar. I am beginning to notice a pattern." She turned toward him. Firelight softened the severity of his features. For the first time in days, he looked less like a duke and more like a man carrying too many responsibilities. Silence settled between them, comfortable, familiar, dangerous in ways Aurelia preferred not to examine too closely. Finally, she looked toward the city again. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if none of this had been discovered?" Lucian joined her near the window. "No," she laughed softly. "You never wonder? Wondering changes nothing." The answer sounded exactly like him. Aurelia shook her head. "That is an exhausting philosophy." A faint smile appeared. Briefly, perhaps. The smile vanished almost immediately, yet the warmth remained. Aurelia studied the lights beyond the glass. "Sometimes I think about the woman I was before Blackmere." Her voice lowered. "The maid." Lucian remained silent, listening. She understood her place. Did she? Aurelia glanced toward him. Yes. Or did she accept what other people decided for her? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, because she was no longer certain. Lucian looked toward the city. "There is a difference." Silence followed, a meaningful one. Aurelia folded her arms lightly. "You always make difficult things sound simple." "Only because I spend a great deal of time thinking about them first." The honesty surprised a laugh from her. Genuine this time. Lucian looked mildly satisfied by the result. The moment lingered longer than either intended. Then a knock interrupted the room. Both turned immediately. A footman entered carrying a silver tray. One sealed envelope rested at the center. "Your Grace." Lucian accepted the correspondence. The servant withdrew. Aurelia noticed the seal before Lucian broke it. Veil. The atmosphere cooled instantly. Lucian opened the letter and read. His expression changed after only a few lines. Not surprise, recognition, as though he had anticipated this move eventually. "What is it?" Aurelia asked. He handed her the page. The message contained a formal invitation. No, not an invitation. A challenge disguised as one. House Vale requested Lucian Ravenshire's presence at a public assembly scheduled the following evening. Attendance by senior members of Parliament, judges, noble houses, and inquiry officials had already been confirmed. Aurelia continued reading, then reached the final paragraph. Her stomach tightened. Lord Cedric Vale respectfully requests that His Grace clarify his official position regarding the alleged Ashbourne claimant before the assembled witnesses of society. Silence filled the room. Aurelia lowered the page slowly. "He wants a public declaration." "Yes." Lucian's voice remained calm. Too calm. She understood immediately. Cedric was attempting to isolate her. Force Lucian into neutrality. Create distance between Ravenshire and Ashbourne before the inquiry concluded. Politically, it made sense. Strategically, it made sense. Emotionally, it felt like another attack. Aurelia looked toward the fire. "You do not have to attend." Lucian's answer arrived instantly. "I know." "Then perhaps you should not." He studied her carefully. "Why?" Aurelia searched for the correct words. "Because Cedric wants a spectacle." "Probably. Because whatever you say will become tomorrow's headlines." "Almost certainly." Frustration slipped into her voice. "Then why are you considering it?" Lucian remained silent several seconds. Then he answered. "Because some questions should be answered publicly." The words settled heavily between them. Aurelia stared at him. Something inside her chest became suddenly unsteady. Not fear. Something far more complicated. Lucian took the letter back and folded it carefully. The entire city already believes this battle concerns inheritance. His gaze shifted toward the dark windows. "It does not." Aurelia watched him, waiting. "What does it concern?" Lucian looked directly at her. His gray eyes remained steady, unwavering, certain. "Truth." Silence followed. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. Outside, London continued breathing beneath the winter sky. Finally, Lucian moved toward the door. "Get some rest." Aurelia almost smiled. "You first." A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. Then he left. Alone once more, Aurelia stood beside the window and watched the city lights shimmer beyond the glass. Tomorrow would bring another confrontation, another audience, another attempt to define her. Yet something felt different now. For weeks she had been reacting, defending, surviving. Now the balance was beginning to shift, because for the first time the truth was no longer hiding. It was emerging, piece by piece, witness by witness, record by record. And somewhere beyond London, beyond Parliament, beyond House Vale, the people who had spent 18 years burying the truth were running out of places to hide. London was waiting. Aurelia understood that the moment their carriage turned onto the avenue leading toward Ashcroft Hall, every window seemed occupied. Every balcony held observers. Elegant carriages lined both sides of the street. Footmen moved between arriving guests carrying lanterns against the winter dusk. The gathering Cedric Vale had arranged was not merely a social event. It was a stage. And tonight, half of England intended to watch the performance. Aurelia sat across from Lucian inside the carriage. Neither had spoken much during the journey. Words felt unnecessary. Everything important already existed between them. Questions, evidence, expectations. The city itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Aurelia glanced through the window. How many people will be there? Lucian looked up from the folded correspondence resting in his lap. Too many. She smiled faintly. That is not a number. It is the only number that matters. The answer sounded exactly like him. The smile lingered slightly longer this time. Then nervousness returned. Lucian noticed immediately. He always seemed to. You do not have to enter if you do not wish to. Aurelia looked toward him. And missed the opportunity to be discussed by several hundred strangers while absent? A faint shadow of amusement appeared in his eyes. An unfortunate loss. The moment eased some of the tension. Not all of it. Enough. Outside, the carriage finally slowed. Music drifted faintly through the cold evening air. Light spilled from hundreds of windows. Ashcroft Hall stood illuminated against the darkening sky like a monument to power and influence. Tonight, every important family in London appeared determined to occupy its rooms. A footman opened the carriage door. Lucian stepped out first before turning toward her. Aurelia accepted his hand. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet as before, it steadied her. Together they climbed the entrance steps. Conversations quieted almost immediately. Not completely, just enough to notice. Aurelia felt it happen. The shift, the attention. People who had spent weeks discussing her now stood close enough to see her. Some looked curious, others skeptical. A few appeared openly disappointed that she existed at all. Lucian remained completely unaffected. The grand ballroom beyond the entrance glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Music floated through the air. Nobles filled every available space. Parliament members, judges, influential families, society hostesses, everyone. And standing near the center of it all waited Cedric Vale. He saw them instantly. Of course he did. The evening revolved around their arrival. Cedric crossed the ballroom with practiced confidence. Several conversations died as he approached. Your Grace. Lucian inclined his head slightly. Lord Cedric. Cedric's attention shifted toward Aurelia. His smile remained polite, controlled, empty. Miss Ashbourne. Aurelia met his gaze. Lord Cedric. Silence followed briefly. Then Cedric gestured toward the assembled guests. I am pleased you decided to attend. Lucian answered before Aurelia could. You invited me. I did. Cedric's smile never wavered. And London appreciates clarity. The statement lingered between them. Not quite a challenge. Not quite a threat. Something close to both. Before anyone could respond, another voice interrupted. Then perhaps clarity should begin with facts. Every head turned. The woman approaching from across the ballroom moved with calm confidence. Silver threaded through her dark hair. Elegance softened by age rather than diminished by it. Aurelia recognized her immediately from portraits. Seraphine Vale. Silence spread outward through the room like ripples across water. Even Cedric appeared surprised. Genuine surprise, the first Aurelia had ever seen from him. Seraphine stopped beside them. Her gaze moved briefly toward Aurelia, then toward Lucien, finally toward Cedric. "Aunt." Cedric recovered quickly. "I was unaware you planned to attend." Seraphine's expression remained unreadable. Many people appear unaware of many things lately. Several nearby guests exchanged glances. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Cedric understood it too. Yet before he could respond, another announcement echoed through the ballroom. The evening's formal proceedings were beginning. Chairs filled quickly. Conversations quieted. Guests gathered around a raised platform positioned near the center of the hall. Parliament officials occupied the front rows. Judges sat nearby. Reporters lingered toward the back. Aurelia had never seen so many people waiting for someone else's life to be explained. Lucien guided her toward seats near the front. The gesture appeared natural. Yet she noticed the subtle way he positioned himself. Always slightly between her and the crowd. Always aware. Always protective. The proceedings began with speeches, introductions, formal acknowledgments. None of them mattered. Everyone knew why they were there. Eventually Cedric rose and approached the platform. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily through the hall. "We gather tonight because truth matters." Aurelia nearly laughed at the irony. Around her, several people nodded approvingly. Cedric continued. "For weeks, our nation has debated a question that affects inheritance, governance, and public trust." His gaze moved deliberately toward her. Questions deserve answers. Polite applause followed. Aurelia remained still. Cedric's performance was effective, confident, controlled, carefully rehearsed. Then he reached the moment everyone expected. "Before the final inquiry begins, I believe clarity regarding House Ravenshire's position would benefit all involved." Silence settled instantly. Cedric turned toward Lucien. "Your Grace." Hundreds of eyes followed. "Do you officially support the claim that Miss Aurelia Ashbourne is the rightful heir?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Aurelia felt every heartbeat, every second, every expectation. Cedric stood waiting. So did London. Lucien rose slowly from his chair. The movement alone commanded attention. Conversations disappeared entirely. Even the musicians had stopped playing. For several moments, Lucien said nothing. He simply looked around the room. Parliament officials, noble houses, journalists, society leaders. Then his gaze found Aurelia briefly. Only briefly, yet something settled inside her chest immediately. Calm, certainty. When he finally spoke, his voice carried through the ballroom without effort. "No." Silence crashed through the room. Absolute. Complete. Aurelia felt the world stop. Around her, guests exchanged stunned looks. Cedric's eyes sharpened immediately. Triumph flickered there. Briefly. Very briefly. Then Lucien continued. "I do not support the claim." The silence deepened. Aurelia stared at him, unable to breathe, unable to think. Cedric remained perfectly still, waiting. Lucien looked toward the assembled crowd. Support implies uncertainty. His voice never wavered. It suggests a matter of opinion. The ballroom remained frozen. Not a single guest moved. Lucien's gaze returned to Cedric. "This is not an opinion." The words landed with remarkable force. "The evidence exists. The witnesses exist. The records exist." He paused. "Aurelia Ashbourne exists." Silence followed. Then something extraordinary happened. Nobody spoke because nobody knew how. Cedric's expression tightened for the first time all evening. Not dramatically, just enough. Lucien continued. "You asked whether I support her claim." His eyes moved briefly toward Aurelia. "I support the truth." The room erupted. Not with applause. Not immediately. With conversation. Murmurs. Reactions. Surprise. The atmosphere shifted beneath everyone's feet. Cedric had expected neutrality, distance, political caution. Instead he received certainty. Public certainty. Aurelia sat motionless. The words echoed through her chest. Not because they were dramatic, because they were simple, honest, unconditional. Cedric recovered quickly. Strong convictions do not replace evidence. No, Lucien agreed immediately, which is why I welcome the inquiry. The response landed perfectly. Several judges exchanged thoughtful looks. Parliament officials whispered among themselves. Momentum had shifted, not decisively, yet noticeably. Cedric opened his mouth to continue. Another voice interrupted. Then perhaps the inquiry should receive all available evidence. The ballroom fell silent again. Seraphine Vale had risen from her seat. Every eye turned toward her. Cedric's expression changed instantly. Concern. Real concern. Seraphine stepped forward slowly. The crowd parted without being asked. "Aunt." Cedric's voice remained controlled. "This is neither the time nor the place." "Actually." Seraphine stopped near the platform. "It is both." Silence settled heavily. She reached into her reticule and removed a folded packet of papers. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. Lucien's attention sharpened immediately. Seraphine held the documents calmly. "For 18 years, I remained silent." Her voice carried throughout the ballroom. "I believed silence protected people." Pause followed. "I was wrong." No one moved. No one interrupted. Seraphine's gaze found Aurelia. Sadness softened her expression. Regret. Genuine regret. Then she looked toward Cedric. "Your father knew the child survived." Silence exploded through the room. Gasps. Whispers. Shock. Cedric went completely still. Seraphine continued before anyone could react. Alistair Vale knew as well. The ballroom seemed unable to breathe. Aurelia stared at her. Every heartbeat thundered inside her chest. Seraphine raised the documents slightly. "And these letters explain why." Absolute silence followed. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. A footman hurried inside. Breathless. Urgent. Every head turned. The servant crossed directly toward Lucien. "Your Grace." His voice shook slightly. "A messenger has arrived." Lucien frowned. "Now?" "Yes." The footman swallowed. He insisted the matter could not wait. Something in his expression changed the atmosphere immediately. Lucien noticed it. So did Aurelia. "What happened?" The servant lowered his voice. Yet in the silence, everyone still heard the answer. "Henry Whitlock has been found." The room froze. Every conversation died instantly. Every eye widened. Lucien stared at the footman. "Alive?" The servant nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." Relief surged through Aurelia so suddenly it nearly stole her breath. But the servant had not finished. His face remained pale, disturbed. "And he says he remembers the name of the Ravenshire who was with Alistair Vale on the night of the fire." Silence crashed through the ballroom. Complete. Devastating. Because after 18 years, the final secret was finally coming home. The ballroom remained frozen long after the footman's announcement. Hundreds of people stood suspended between disbelief and anticipation. Henry Whitlock had been found. Alive. After days of uncertainty, rumors, and speculation, one of the most important witnesses in the entire inquiry had returned. Yet it was the second revelation that truly seized the room. He remembered the name. The Ravenshire connected to the night of the fire. The final piece of a mystery that had haunted multiple families for 18 years. Aurelia felt her heartbeat hammer against her ribs. Across the hall, Lucien stood perfectly still. Seraphine Vale remained near the platform, her unopened packet of letters still resting in her hands. Cedric Vale looked as though the ground beneath him had begun to shift. For the first time since Aurelia met him, certainty had disappeared from his face. The footman swallowed nervously beneath the weight of everyone's attention. "Where is Mr. Whitlock now?" Lucien asked. "At Parliament House, Your Grace." The servant's voice trembled slightly. The officials requested immediate protection and transport. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Parliament House. That meant the government already knew, already understood the significance. Seraphine slowly lowered her documents. Then there is no reason to delay any further. Her voice cut through the noise with remarkable clarity. Silence returned almost immediately. She looked toward the assembled officials. The truth has waited 18 years. It can wait no longer. One of the senior parliament members rose from his seat. Lady Seraphine, are you prepared to submit your evidence formally? Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just one simple word. Aurelia watched as Seraphine crossed the ballroom and handed the packet to the officials. Several judges moved closer. Cedric remained motionless. The atmosphere had changed completely now. What began as a public challenge had become a public unraveling. Within an hour, the gathering dissolved. Not because anyone wished to leave, because everyone understood the real battle would now move to Parliament. Carriages filled the streets outside. Journalists raced through the city carrying fragments of what they had witnessed. London would not sleep tonight. Neither would Aurelia. Parliament House stood illuminated against the dark sky when they arrived shortly after midnight. Officials moved quickly through corridors crowded with solicitors, clerks, witnesses, and observers. The building felt alive, electric with anticipation. Aurelia walked beside Lucien through hallways lined with portraits and history. Yet all she could think about was one question. The Ravenshire name. The final secret. The answer waiting somewhere ahead. They entered a private chamber where several officials had gathered. Mr. Hargrove stood near the far wall. Clara Hastings sat nearby. Relief appeared immediately on her face when she saw Aurelia. Then the door opened again. Henry Whitlock entered. For a moment nobody spoke. The old steward appeared exhausted. Older than before. Wearier. Yet alive. Entirely alive. Aurelia crossed the room before she even realized she was moving. Henry smiled softly. Miss Ashbourne. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her chest. You disappeared. Henry nodded. Unfortunately. What happened? The old steward glanced toward the assembled officials. Someone wished to ensure I missed the inquiry. The answer surprised no one. Yet hearing it aloud still carried weight. Henry lowered himself into a chair. Lucien stepped forward. The Ravenshire name. No one wasted time. Not tonight. Henry's expression grew serious immediately. He looked toward Aurelia first, then toward Lucien. I remembered only recently. His voice sounded tired. Age is not always kind to memory. Silence settled over the chamber. Henry folded his hands. For years, I believed I had forgotten the face. He paused. Then Clara's testimony brought it back. Aurelia held her breath. Henry looked directly at Lucien. The man near the east wing was Lord Nathaniel Ravenshire. The room became silent. Absolute. Complete. Then confusion replaced shock almost immediately. Lucien frowned. Nathaniel. Aurelia glanced toward him. You know the name? Lucien nodded slowly. My uncle. Henry confirmed it. Yes. Relief moved through the room so quickly it almost felt physical. Not Lucien. Never Lucien. Not his father either. An uncle. A man long dead. Yet questions remained. Many questions. Why was he there? Aurelia asked. Henry exhaled slowly. Because he was helping your mother. Silence followed. Then several people spoke at once. Henry raised one hand gently. The assumptions have been wrong. The room quieted immediately. Nathaniel Ravenshire was not working with Alistair Vale. His voice strengthened slightly. He was working against him. Aurelia stared at him. Henry continued. Nathaniel discovered the plan weeks before the fire. Every person in the chamber listened without moving. He learned that several families intended to remove House Ashbourne from northern inheritance negotiations. Including Vale, Lucien said. Yes. Henry nodded. But not only Vale. He looked toward the letter Seraphine had provided. The conspiracy was larger than anyone realized. Aurelia felt pieces finally beginning to align. Nathaniel tried to stop it. Yes. Henry's eyes softened. He helped arrange your protection. The room fell silent again. The answer explained everything. The note, the secrecy, the hidden registry, the warnings that Ravenshire must remain uninformed. Someone inside Ravenshire had chosen to help, chosen to protect. Lucian lowered his gaze briefly. Aurelia understood why. The uncle he barely remembered had carried part of this burden long before either of them knew it existed. The hours that followed felt almost unreal. Seraphine's letters were examined. Henry's testimony was recorded. Clara's statement was confirmed. The Blackthorn records aligned with the registry archives. One by one, the remaining pieces fell into place. By dawn, the truth stood fully exposed. Alistair Vale had participated in a scheme designed to eliminate Ashbourne influence from inheritance negotiations. Several families had benefited. Others had remained silent. Nathaniel Ravenshire and Edmund Blackthorn had attempted to protect the child at the center of the conflict. Aurelia, the cover-up that followed had lasted 18 years. Not because the truth disappeared, because powerful people preferred it buried. 3 days later, the final inquiry convened. The chamber overflowed. Parliament members, judges, journalists, noble families, everyone who mattered seemed present. Aurelia sat beside Lucian as testimony concluded. Evidence filled entire tables. Records, witness statements, financial ledgers, registry confirmations. There was very little left to dispute. Yet when the final ruling arrived, silence still gripped the room. The presiding official rose. Aurelia felt her pulse quicken. After examination of the evidence presented, this panel recognizes Aurelia Ashbourne as the lawful surviving heir of House Ashbourne. The words echoed through the chamber. Then came the second declaration. All challenges to her identity are dismissed. For a moment, Aurelia could not breathe. 18 years. 18 years of absence, of uncertainty, of a life stolen before she understood what had been taken. Gone. Not forgotten. Not erased. Restored. Applause began somewhere behind her, then spread. Not everyone joined. Some never would. That no longer mattered. The truth did not require unanimous approval. Beside her, Lucian remained silent. Yet when Aurelia turned toward him, she found something she had never seen before. Relief. Pure and unmistakable. Later that afternoon, London seemed different. Brighter somehow. The winter clouds had finally broken. Sunlight spilled across the city for the first time in days. Aurelia stood in the gardens behind Ravenshire House watching pale gold light touch the bare branches. The world felt strangely quiet now, as though a storm had finally passed. Footsteps approached behind her. Familiar footsteps. She smiled before turning around. Lucian stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt different now. No longer uncertain. No longer fragile. Just honest. Aurelia looked toward the gardens. It is over. Yes. His voice sounded calm. It is. She laughed softly. I thought it would feel different. How? Aurelia considered the question. Louder. A faint smile appeared. You survived Parliament. That may have altered your expectations. She laughed again. Genuine and effortless. The sound lingered between them. Then silence returned. Comfortable. Warm. Lucian looked toward the winter sunlight spreading across the gardens. What will you do now? Aurelia followed his gaze. The future. For the first time, it felt like something she actually possessed. I do not know. She smiled faintly. That is both terrifying and wonderful. Reasonable. The answer sounded exactly like him. Aurelia turned toward him fully. There is one thing I do know. Lucian raised an eyebrow slightly. What is that? She held his gaze. No fear now. No uncertainty. Just truth. I would not be here without you. For once, Lucian had no immediate response. The silence that followed said enough. Finally, he looked away toward the sunlight touching the gardens. A rare gesture. A vulnerable one. You were always going to be here. Aurelia smiled. That is not what happened. His gaze returned to hers. The moment stretched. Quiet. Meaningful. Real. Neither needed grand declarations. The past weeks had already revealed everything that mattered. Loyalty, trust, sacrifice, choice. Love often arrived disguised as those things long before anyone named it. A distant church bell echoed across London. The city continued around them, alive, moving forward. Aurelia looked toward the horizon beyond the gardens. For years she had belonged nowhere, a servant without answers, a daughter without history, a woman without certainty. Now she carried all of it. Her name, her family, her future. And beside her stood the man who had never stopped searching for the truth, even when everyone else insisted it was lost. The winter sun climbed higher above London. The shadows retreated. And for the first time in 18 years, Aurelia Ashbourne stepped fully into the life that had always been waiting for her.